The man opens the door and sees his wife and daughter in the hallway. This scene was exactly what Rick had been anticipating. Over a year had passed since the war against the Saviors. People have rebuilt houses and planted fruits and vegetables. The Alexandria safe zone has been rebuilt. They've even gone solar with Eugene's help. Everything was progressing in a positive direction. However, Rick was no longer the sole leader of a single community. He now had to maintain the new order that had been established. It's not as easy as Rick thought it would be. A year ago, he hadn't eradicated the remaining members of Salvation Hall. Instead, he had provided them with food and window glass, hoping they could become self-sufficient like the other communities. But a year had passed, and it seemed that the Saviors hadn't improved. The windows were still broken, and despite some workers actively planting vegetables, their crops continued to wither. So, for over a year, the Saviors had relied on supplies from the Hilltop. Daryl has become the leader of the Saviors and he doesn't know what to do about the situation. He even began reading books. Laura came to report to Daryl that their food had run out again. With no other option, Daryl contacted Tara to ask her to inform Rick that they needed to search for supplies in the city. The communities were too far apart for radio signals to reach, so Rick had established relay stations with a representative from each community to pass on messages. Soon, individuals from Alexandria's safe zone, the Kingdom, the Hilltop, and Oceanside all gathered in the city. A year had passed, and one of Gabriel's eyes was now completely blind, giving him a new kind of charm. Maggie had developed the Hilltop well and arrived in a horse-drawn carriage. They eventually reached their destination for the day, a large museum. There was something they wanted. The group cautiously entered the museum, which was covered in dust. Occasional stray zombies posed little threat to them. Rick instructed everyone to split up and search for what they needed, then reconvene at the meeting point. Maggie and her group arrived in the main hall of the building, which left them in awe. It was hard to imagine how it had been constructed. Quickly, they noticed that the glass floor was hiding zombies beneath it, but fortunately, this type of material was unlikely to shatter, so they didn't pay it much mind. They began to split up and take action. The Alexandria safe zone guys went to a storage room. Rick opened drawer after drawer, eventually uncovering bags of packaged items. The labels indicated a comprehensive variety of seed types. Jadis recommended this place, and Gabriel wonders how she knew it had seeds. Jadis explained that she had been a teacher and had brought her students here on a field trip. They had discovered that this place had preserved nearly every type of seed. It was quite the unexpected treasure in the post-apocalyptic world. Perhaps this find could improve the Savior's current situation. Meanwhile, Maggie had stumbled upon a plow, which could be a great asset for agriculture. She decides to take it back, have the blacksmith duplicate it, and give the Saviors a. In the end, everyone found what they were looking for, even coming across a large medieval-style carriage. They carefully secured it with ropes and slowly lowered it down. They were cautious, fearing that the glass beneath couldn't withstand the weight. Following Rick's guidance, they moved the carriage down step by step. However, they failed to notice that as the wheels turned, cracks had begun to form in the glass, and these cracks were expanding as they moved. Fortunately, their careful approach allowed them to successfully move the carriage across. Now, only a small boat and the plow remained. Seeing the cracks in the glass, Rick kept his cool and instructed them to maintain a steady pace. Ezekiel and Carol quickly left with the plow, but an unexpected incident occurred as Ezekiel slipped and fell. Fortunately, they were all tied with ropes, preventing the zombies from immediately attacking Ezekiel. However, the zombies were still able to grasp his clothes. If the rope were to break, Ezekiel's fate would be grim. Rick quickly organized the team to pull the rope upward, while Daryl used his crossbow to kill zombies and cover Ezekiel. Eventually, with a tense effort, Ezekiel managed to climb back up, narrowly avoiding disaster. Carol rushed forward to comfort Ezekiel, her own nerves still rattled from the scare. Then they loaded up their supplies and started back. This time the community found what they were looking for when they went out looking for supplies. On the way back, Daryl continued to lead the group on his motorcycle. With gasoline being a precious commodity, horseback riding had become the preferred mode of transportation among the communities. The young people behind were engaged in conversation. Among them was a man named Ken, the blacksmith's son from the Hilltop. It was his first time on an outing, and he had made new friends. Ezekiel deliberately lingered at the back. The close call he had experienced earlier had left him shaken, fearing he might not have the chance to do certain things before it was too late. Consequently, Ezekiel took out a ring and proposed to Carol. After a few seconds of silence, Carol declined, stating she wasn't ready and using the excuse that she didn't want to be proposed to on horseback. Instead of being disappointed, Ezekiel smiled and said to Carol, I love you and I will always love you." He promised to keep the ring and wait until she was ready. Daryl and Rosita come back and tell Rick they've both found something. They reported a large horde of zombies in the neighborhood, causing a bridge to collapse and cutting off the shortest route to the communities. The alternative route was twice the distance and infested with zombies. Rick immediately ordered everyone to seek refuge at the nearest locations, the Hilltop and Salvation Hall. Until the horde dispersed in a couple of days, the group quickly set off to evade the approaching zombies. An hour later, they encountered a problem. The carriage had become stuck in the mud, and the horses were exhausted. Maggie suggested leaving these items here and sending someone to retrieve them in a couple of days, but Michonne believed they should try to salvage them now. She argued that the approaching horde of zombies would likely destroy the items in their path. Rick decided to rest the horses in an open area while they attempted to free the stuck carriage. Despite the combined efforts of several strong warriors, the carriage remained stubbornly immobile. In the distance, Michonne cried out as she spotted scattered zombies approaching, with the zombies still some distance away. They redoubled their efforts to pull the carriage. Luckily, this time the carriage was dragged up. By now the zombies have moved in. Rick asked the others to bring in the horses and pull the wagon while he took Daryl and Michonne to stop the zombies. Just then, a zombie appeared up ahead, causing the horse to become startled and restless. There was no other choice. The zombies were getting closer. Rick reluctantly had them abandon the carriage and retreat. Ken also untied the ropes from the horse's body. However, as they ran a few meters away, Ken noticed another rope still tethered to the horse. Ignoring the advice of Rick and the others, Ken went back and proceeded to cut the rope from the carriage. But the zombies had already pounced on Ken. His cries of agony agitated the nearby horse, which kicked Ken in the chest. Rick had no choice but to lead the men to kill the zombies. The others checked Ken's injuries. Originally, amputation could have prevented infection, but the fatal wound was the one caused by the horse's kick to Ken's chest. Despite Siddiq's encouragement for Ken to stay conscious and hold on, it was ultimately in vain. Maggie felt deep sorrow. As a leader, she had taken Ken out, but couldn't bring him back alive. Rick's side had cleared the zombies and watched them in silence. This situation is not easy for anyone's heart. Maggie could only endure the pain and send Ken on his final journey. That night, Maggie and her people returned to the hilltop. Maggie's first task upon returning was to inform Ken's parents of the tragic news. Ken's mother struggled to accept it. Her son had lost his life for a plow. Tammy lashed out at Maggie. "Is this how you lead? Her son didn't need to go out there. He didn't even die for the hilltop. Look at what you've accomplished in the past year. Feeding the saviors with their food wasn't enough. You got Ken killed." Maggie remained silent, understanding the pain of being a parent. After a while, the people of the hilltop gathered to hold a funeral for Ken. Everyone was heavy-hearted. Ken is very popular here. But now, that cheerful young man was gone. Maggie could only hold her son and pray upstairs. The couple didn't want to see her right now. Rick and his group then arrived at Salvation Hall. It was the first time for the workers to see Rick, and they all looked at him with curiosity and gratitude. Rick had liberated them, granting them the gift of freedom and equality. At that moment, Michonne noticed something on the wall and asked Daryl if this kind of thing happened often. Written on the wall was, "The saviors saved us. We're still Negan." Daryl explained, somewhat resignedly, that there would always be a few troublemakers in the shadows, especially more after crops wither. The workers gathered around, shaking Rick's hand in gratitude. The man in the lead is the representative of the workers. He pleads with Rick to help them through this difficult time, because now the crops are dying and people are depressed. Rick addressed them, urging them to stay strong. He assured them that they had brought back new seeds and tools this time, which would surely resolve their current issues. Together, they could overcome any challenge. The workers applauded when they saw hope. However, Daryl pulled Rick aside to a more secluded spot and shared his thoughts. He suggested that Rick should assign someone else to manage this place again. Daryl expressed his preference for being outside the high walls and admitted he wasn't cut out for leadership. He criticized the saviors, claiming they were too pampered and unlikely to change their old ways. Daryl also advised Rick against dispersing their own people, suggesting that they should stick to the original small team. In the apocalypse, they were incredibly strong as a cohesive unit, but Rick disagreed with Daryl's idea. For one, they couldn't afford to give up halfway whenever they encountered challenges. Secondly, there's no one left to replace Daryl. Daryl could only smoke alone in frustration at the thought of having to stay here. Carol, sensing Daryl's frustration, approached him for a chat. They also discussed Ezekiel. Daryl could only offer his blessings, though a hint of jealousy might have lingered beneath the surface. Sometimes, missed opportunities were just that, missed. Carol proposed helping Daryl take over for a while. She encouraged him to pursue whatever he wanted to do. Carol could use the time to figure out if she should accept Ezekiel's proposal or not. They leaned against each other under the moonlight, having already become family in each other's eyes. Meanwhile, at the Hilltop, Ken's funeral had concluded, and his mother had fallen into a sorrowful sleep after having a bit of wine. At this moment, Gregory entered their room, intending to have a conversation with Ken's father. Of course, Gregory is here to badmouth Maggie. Naturally, Gregory told Earl that Maggie was nothing more than Rick's lapdog, obediently doing whatever Rick said. If he was still the leader, Ken wouldn't be dead. So, it's Maggie, this woman, who's responsible for your son's death. Gregory claims that he's talked to a lot of people who aren't happy with the way things are. They're just afraid to say so. After a while, Maggie couldn't sleep and decided to take a walk with her son. Unexpectedly, she encountered Gregory there as well. When Gregory saw Maggie, he looked so pleased with her. He didn't have the arrogance he had when he was talking behind her back just now. As Maggie was about to continue her walk, Gregory quickly interjected, "During Ken's burial today, I think I saw your husband Glenn's grave vandalized, probably the work of some mischievous child." Upon hearing this, Maggie hurriedly pushed the baby carriage to check. As Maggie turned the corner of a small building, a figure in black appeared behind her. By the time Maggie noticed, she had already been knocked down, and the baby was crying on the ground. The person in black covered Maggie's mouth to prevent her from screaming. Maggie, not one to back down, engaged in a struggle with the assailant, though she found herself at a disadvantage in terms of strength. Enid hears the commotion and rushes over to back up Maggie, but she's slapped by the man in black onto a nearby water pipe and passes out. Maggie takes the opportunity to punch the man in black. Alden and Cindy arrive to assist. Maggie rushes up and pulls off the hat of the man in black, who turns out to be Ken's father. In an instant, Marge understood something. Having settled her son, Maggie stormed angrily into Gregory's room. Seeing Maggie's bloodied face, Gregory pretended not to know what had happened. Maggie, seething with anger, confronted him, accusing him of trying to kill her, but being too much of a coward to do it himself. "You really want to lead here?" Maggie asked. "But you're too spineless even to take a life," Gregory retorted, claiming that he had built the Hilltop, and Maggie was nothing more than Rick's lapdog. After saying that, Gregory directly stabbed Maggie with the knife in his hand. Fortunately, Maggie had anticipated this move and was prepared. This old man is really a wimp who only knows how to play this kind of thing. Maggie grabbed the knife with her fighting skills and pressed it against Gregory's neck. The next day, Rick and Daryl arrived at the Hilltop. As soon as they dismounted, they stared at Maggie's face, wondering what was going on. In the evening, Rick held Maggie's baby with a pampered look on his face. To honor her father's memory, Maggie had named the baby Herschel. They engaged in casual conversation for a while. Rick told us why he was here today. He wanted Maggie to help him fix the bridge to make it easier for the communities to communicate with each other. Currently, the Hilltop was in the best condition, with abundant manpower and an excess of food that couldn't be consumed. So Rick had the cheek to say, "You've always been generous, aiding the saviors for over a year, but I still need more." He explained that repairing the bridge required additional resources and manpower. Therefore, he hoped Maggie would be generous once again. After considering for a moment, Maggie responded, "I won't stop my people if they want to help repair the bridge, but if there's no return on our resources, I won't continue. The Hilltop already have a lot of people who have a problem with that. So Salvation Hall wants food, I can give it to them, but they have to provide most of the manpower to build the bridge. Additionally, they should supply fuel made from withered corn to the Hilltop." Rick, however, insisted that helping Salvation Hall was their duty in its current precarious state, and they shouldn't impose conditions. Maggie directly countered, "Why is it a duty? They surrendered. Not killing them is already a huge favor." She argued that the Hilltop themselves hadn't resolved their own issues, so how could they manage Salvation Hall's problems? Rick found himself momentarily speechless in response. Later that evening, Maggie gathered all the Hilltop. She was going to settle the matter of Gregory once and for all. Gregory was to face execution by hanging. He begged for mercy, desperately seeking another chance, but Maggie's gaze remained cold and unmoved. She nodded to Daryl. Michonne caught sight of two children behind them and tried to signal Maggie to stop, not wanting the kids to witness the gruesome scene. However, Rick stopped her. Daryl slaps his horse's arse. Gregory swings like a swing. Maggie couldn't stand it this time. She had forgiven Gregory multiple times before, but his unrepentant behavior and attempt on her life had pushed her to this extreme. The thought of what might have happened to her son if Gregory had succeeded was unbearable. In a post-apocalyptic world where traffic remains unchanged, the bridge connecting the communication between communities collapsed. Rick rallied the 5 major communities to set up camp near the bridge. It's been 35 days since the bridge repair began, a testament to the unity of everyone involved. Things seem to be back on track. Much to Rick's satisfaction, Rick chose not to kill Negan because he wanted to establish an order like this. People shouldn't be suspicious and kill each other, but instead, unite, cooperate, and care for one another, just like they were doing now. This was the future Carl wanted to see. Rick firmly believed that no matter how difficult, this bridge was the path to the future. When future generations pass by, they may remember the efforts of their fathers. After a month of construction, as agreed, Salvation Hall provided the majority of the manpower. Eugene was the chief designer of the bridge, and according to his projections, it would be completed in another 8 or 9 days, perhaps even sooner if they pushed harder. And then Rosita came back to report. She was responsible for using explosives to clear a blocked road and had encountered a zombie horde of over 100 nearby. Rosita asked Rick whether they should delay the operation. Rick thought there was no need to wait since they had designated people on horn duty who would lead the zombies away if they approached. Rosita received her orders and left. Eugene informed Rick that 6 members of the Saviors had left since the bridge repair began, presumably unable to withstand the hardships. Rick sighed in resignation, planning to talk to Carol, the interim leader, about this. In addition, to prevent injuries during the construction, the only doctor, Siddiq, was present. Enid had become Siddiq's student and was now capable of handling things on her own. Rick was pleased to see Enid's progress. Rick approached Siddiq with the intention of sending him back to Alexandria's safe zone, as there was a flu outbreak there. Enid was apprehensive about Siddiq leaving, not yet ready to face things alone, but with the encouragement of the others, Enid's confidence is strengthened. At this moment, construction on the bridge was in full swing. The results of over 30 days of effort were nearing success, and everyone was working diligently. Even young Henry had taken an active role, responsible for delivering water to the workers. However, fresh water was scarce, and each person could only have a cup. But this Savior's man wants more, despite the rules. Naturally, Henry couldn't agree to this. Justin, from the Saviors, pushed Henry to the ground and took a swig from the water bottle without any consideration for the others who needed water. Henry swiftly employed the moves that Morgan had taught him and managed to knock Justin down. The other members of the Saviors mocked Justin for being taken down by a kid, which only fueled Justin's humiliation. This causes Justin to lose face and walks up to Henry to teach him a lesson, but Daryl pulls him back. Daryl tells Justin that everyone is doing their job. Justin gets even angrier and screams at Daryl to mind his own business. Justin was not going to let it go after being embarrassed in front of so many people. A scuffle broke out between Justin and Daryl, and Aaron was forced to join in. The people around us don't try to stop them from fighting. They all gather around to join in the fun. Luckily, Rick was able to get in between them and stop the fight. Once they had calmed down a bit, Rick didn't blame anyone but urged them to get back to work. And gradually, the crowd dispersed. Back inside the tents, Daryl was visibly discontent. He couldn't understand why they had let that jerk go so easily. He also had a great deal of trouble understanding why Rick had to force these people together. It's just the way they are. Even Carol shared Daryl's perspective. However, Rick insisted that they just needed to endure a little longer. The bridge was almost finished. He aimed to establish an era of unity and harmony, where everyone could stride towards the future together. In Daryl's eyes, Rick seemed lost in his fantasies about the future and was deaf to others' opinions, convinced he was always right. At lunchtime, everyone sat around the canteen. The incident was never brought up again and seemed to be just one of life's little hiccups. And Gabriel had an unexpected bonus. Jadis had joined Alexandria's safe zone some time ago and, initially ostracized, she found solace in Gabriel's guidance. Their relationship had grown stronger over time, and Jadis had become more cheerful. She boldly took Gabriel's hand, her gaze unflinching, leaving Gabriel momentarily unsure how to react. In the evening, Rosita was preparing explosives to clear the blocked road. Her partner for this task was Arat, a member of the Saviors, and the same person who had scarred Rosita's face. The explosion echoed through the sky, and nearby zombie hordes turned their attention toward the community's location. However, this was all part of Rick's plan. He had already set up reconnaissance personnel. Today, Tara was on duty. Tara quickly noticed zombies approaching from a distance and relayed the message back to Rick. Rick remained unsurprised and instructed Tara to follow the plan. Tara then sends a message to Jerry, Bagpiper 1, to play the bagpipes to attract the zombies. The effect was immediate as the zombies started heading towards the direction of the lumberyard. Once the zombies got there, Bagpiper 2 played his bagpipes and the zombies passed. While Rick is in command, Alden approached and informed him that 6 members of the Saviors had escaped since the bridge repair began. After investigating, Alden found that none of them had returned to Salvation Hall. Rick was surprised that none of them had returned. Alden also wondered, because a few of the Saviors still have family members in Salvation Hall. They cannot just leave. Must be something happened. Moreover, those members didn't have any guns with them. While they were confused, Tara is frantically calling Point 2 on the walkie-talkie, but the bagpipes never sound. If they didn't divert the zombie horde soon, it would directly attack the lumberyard. Rick realized the urgency of the situation, especially since they were still collecting wood in that area. While they're working, the horse next to them gets restless. Daryl, who is experienced in wilderness survival, realized something was wrong and looked around. Sure enough, 2 zombies came up to him, and it was just a matter of Daryl picking up a stick on the ground and taking care of them. Although initially a minor concern, Daryl easily dispatched them with a wooden stick he found on the ground. However, he then noticed an entire horde of zombies closing in. Daryl swiftly warned the others to retreat, their attention drawn by his urgency. Looking at the densely packed zombies, the members of the Saviors standing on top of the tree pile began to panic and immediately dropped the rope in their hands and began to run for their lives. Aaron pulled a teammate away, but a tree trunk knocked him down. Seeing his close friend injured, Daryl immediately called the others back to help. Only then did they realize the folly of their actions and work together to prepare to remove the trunk. However, it was too heavy to lift at the moment. The zombies were closing in on Aaron, who didn't want to endanger his companions. He urged them to leave and not sacrifice themselves here. Yet, Daryl couldn't abandon a teammate. He instructed the other 2 to keep trying to lift the tree trunk. Drawing his short knife, Daryl charged forward to kill the approaching zombies, buying them time. Finally, using leverage, Aaron was able to get his arm out. However, it was horrifyingly clear that Aaron's arm had been crushed, and he had nearly lost all feeling in it. Daryl quickly supported Aaron as they retreated. With the zombies hot on their heels, Rick and his group arrived at the scene. Rick realized something was wrong when the second bagpipe didn't sound, and rushed here with his team. The sheer number of zombies was overwhelming. Rick observed the terrain and took out the shotgun behind his back and hit the rope binding the tree trunks. The wood rolled down and smashed the zombies to pieces. They quickly transported Aaron to the infirmary. Siddiq had already returned to Alexandria's safe zone, leaving Enid to handle this situation alone. It was the first time she had ever been faced with such a critical situation, and looking at Aaron's arm, it was clear that drastic measures needed to be taken. Enid immediately decides to amputate the limb, then cauterizes the wound with a flamethrower and stops the bleeding. Otherwise, Aaron will lose his life. Aaron and Daryl can't believe it when they hear about the amputation, but there's nothing else to do. The most important thing is to stay alive. Daryl strangles Aaron's big arm with a rope. With no anesthesia available, Aaron gritted his teeth and endured the excruciating pain. After treating Aaron's injuries, Daryl left the tent in a huff. Daryl went to Carol's tent and asked who bagpiper number 2 was. Instead of answering, Carol looked towards the door. "It's this guy." Seeing Daryl's furious gaze, Justin hastily explained that the radio had run out of batteries. Daryl wasn't about to let Justin off the hook easily. He pinned Justin down and delivered a fierce beating. Finally, Carol pulled Daryl back. Daryl turned his head and saw Henry coming around, so he didn't continue. At night, Rick wanted to check on Aaron, but he ran into Justin. Justin said sarcastically to Rick, "You should control your dog. That animal almost killed me." Rick had been holding back for the greater good, and these people had probably forgotten what he was capable of. Rick came up to Justin and said, "I know your type. I used to catch them all the time when I was a cop, always blaming others for your mistakes. I had hope for you before, but I don't anymore. Pack your bags and get the hell out of here in the morning. If I see you again, I'll let you meet your dead companion." Justin was a little scared of Rick, so he didn't say anything harsh. He just told Rick, "I won't stay even if you beg me to, and I'm leaving right now, and I don't want to stay a moment longer." Not far away, 2 figures sat close together, Jadis and Gabriel. They had begun a romantic relationship. Rick went to visit Aaron, and as he stepped out of the tent, he heard the sounds of laughter and joy from the community. In that moment, he couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. Wasn't that the whole point of trying to keep order? People were sitting around eating food and laughing. It didn't matter what neighborhood they were from. Carol wore Ezekiel's engagement ring, and the 2 embraced happily. These were the things Rick had hoped for. Upon returning to Alexandria's safe zone, Rick visited Negan in the cell, recounting the recent events. Rick wanted Negan to understand that the world would prosper without him. Although there is some conflict during the day, it doesn't stop the group from bonding together. After over a year of captivity, Negan's beard was unkempt, and he appeared dispirited. He scoffed at Rick's words, suggesting that gathering around a bonfire didn't constitute unity. Negan believed that it would all crumble eventually and viewed the bridge as a monument to the departed, not a path to the future. In the late hours, someone was on duty atop the watchtower. Jadis was in a good mood over her romantic love, fiddling with something in her hand. Suddenly, she heard a noise and looked up to see a light in the sky, a helicopter. The mysterious organization had appeared again. Jadis' thoughts from a year ago resurfaced. Off in the distance, on a path, Justin left the campsite, drinking as he walked. At this moment, Justin seemed to have noticed something as he approached and took a closer look.
You damn near got yourself killed. What the hell are you?
Late at night, a man walks down the road drinking wine, and suddenly he feels something staring at him.
Christ, you damn near got yourself killed. What the hell are you?
When the man reappeared, he was a zombie. There was a fatal wound on his chest, resembling the impact of an arrow. This man was Justin, who had been banished by Rick. The next day, Justin's body was discovered, sending shockwaves through the entire camp. The saviors confronted the rest of the community, thinking someone was trying to hurt them. So there was a confrontation. Alden rushes into the middle of the crowd and yells at them to stop, promising to find out who's responsible. But the man at the head of the saviors still won't let up and punches Alden directly in the face while he's speaking. The saviors banned from carrying guns in 5 communities, making them feel unsafe. Daryl intervened, placing her hand on her holstered gun, and ordered the saviors to stop causing trouble and return to their duties. But the men retorted that they wouldn't go back, and that it would be better to shoot them than to be killed in secret. Seeing that the saviors refused to back down, other community members took up arms. Some in the saviors speculate that it was Daryl who did it. After all, Daryl and Justin had a dispute. Others suspected Jadis, driven by a desire for revenge, or even a possible alliance between them. So the saviors are going on strike. They're taking up arms to protect themselves. Arat tried to stop them, but the 2 men ignore Arat and call on the others to fight. Gabriel won't allow anyone to hurt his girlfriend. He's at the front of the line. As the battle rages on, Rick finally arrives on horseback. Rick still has some respect in the crowd. The saviors stopped. Laura sees them calm down and urges them not to do this. It will only create more conflicts. Alden also promised to give everyone an explanation. The saviors then reluctantly retreated. Rick then took charge, ordering pairs of individuals to venture out and eliminate nearby zombies. After the crowd dispersed, Alden approached Rick with a proposal to grant some members of the saviors access to firearms for self-defense. Maggie was the first to object, labeling them untrustworthy. Alden, however, argued that individuals like Laura and Arat had reformed and could be trusted. After careful consideration, Rick decided to first ascertain the identity of the murderer before considering the appropriate distribution of firearms. Rick didn't want to do it this way either. It's just that the saviors are the main workforce for bridge repairs, and the situation is really bad right now. They used to think that the 6 people who escaped might have been killed just like Justin. They have no choice but to distribute weapons to stabilize the troops. Maggie didn't say anything after hearing this. Then they looked at the bodies in the car. Rick is a police officer. Justin's chest was obviously wounded by an arrow, and there was also a knife wound on his neck. Rick's mind made some guesses. Afterwards, Rick found Daryl and brought up the topic of the wounds. Daryl said with dissatisfaction, "If I wanted to kill Justin, I would have done it openly. Even though I don't know who killed him, I know that gathering these people together would eventually lead to something like this." Rick shook his head, a point of contention between him and his close friend. Rick believed that the future belonged to everyone. Daryl questioned Rick again. Why do these people get to have a future, while Glenn doesn't? And Abraham and Sasha, and all the people from the kingdom who died? Which community hasn't had someone killed by the saviors? Have you ever thought about what all of us need? The killer doesn't have to pay for their mistakes and still gets to have the same future as everyone else. Why? Rick started delivering a bunch of high-minded statements again, talking about how people shouldn't be killing each other. Daryl shook his head, deciding to head outside. Following Rick's orders, the group split into pairs to clear out the zombies in the area. If they encountered anything, they were to contact each other through their walkie-talkies. Soon, Maggie and Cindy, forming a team, stumbled upon a house. The metal sheet on the roof was making noise and attracting a group of zombies. Maggie has not fought for a long time. She is going to lead the zombies away from the front, and then find a chance to kill the zombies. Cindy, on the other hand, is trying to figure out how to get the iron plates off the top of the house to avoid attracting more zombies. Maggie led away 4 zombies. There's another zombie in front of the house, and Cindy walks up to take it out. Then Cindy approached the front door of the house. There were still some zombies inside, but since they couldn't get out, she decided to ignore them. Cindy just wants to take the tin off the roof. Cindy fell straight through the rotting planks of wood. At this moment, the seal on the door of the house was also broken, and zombies started emerging from inside. Fortunately, Maggie swiftly dealt with the 4 zombies she had lured away earlier and rushed back. Due to her pregnancy and leadership responsibilities, Maggie hadn't been in a fight like this for a while. However, her combat skills were still very proficient. Thanks to the numerous battles they had gone through together, the situation wasn't looking good for Cindy. The zombies pounced on her, leaving her defenseless. Inside the house, there were too many zombies for Maggie to be able to assist Cindy. Just when Cindy was struggling, a crossbow bolt was shot, killing the zombie that was attacking her. Meanwhile, Maggie skillfully took down the last 3 zombies in her area. It was Rick and the others who had arrived just in time. Seeing Cindy catching her breath, Daryl asked with concern. Maggie also picked up a pitchfork and removed the metal sheet from the roof. Rick and the group were here because the team they sent to clear District 5 hadn't responded. They suspected something had gone wrong and were on their way to investigate when they came across Maggie and Cindy. There was a person lying in the woods. After a quick examination, they found that she was only unconscious. It turned out to be a member of their group from Oceanside. Daryl quickly looks around and picks up the weapon on the ground, which is supposed to be their Oceanside's fish gun. At Cindy's call, Beatrice woke up. Rick hurriedly asked what had happened. Beatrice explained that she didn't know either. She and Erat were patrolling together, but as they were heading towards the road, someone attacked them from behind. Now things were getting strange. Maggie also surveyed the area and found Erat's personal weapons and walkie-talkie. Maybe it was the guy who killed Justin. Clearly, they were specifically targeting the Saviors. Back at camp, Rick gathered the key members. The situation had become quite tricky. The Saviors still had no idea about Erat's disappearance. Otherwise, they would undoubtedly be in a state of panic and likely leave the area. That would disrupt their plans to complete the bridge repairs before the high tide. In the end, Rick decided to temporarily withhold this information. The team sent out had to find her, dead or alive. No matter what, Rick and Carol formed one team to search. They both knew that Erat might already be dead. However, they had no choice. They had to find the killer. Otherwise, the Saviors might engage them in direct conflict. Today's conflict was just the beginning. Daryl and Maggie formed another team, discussing Rick's approach as they walked. Maggie was also conflicted. She couldn't bring herself to forgive Negan like Rick could, especially since her husband had died at his hands. But Rick's approach did have its benefits for the future and for their descendants. As they spoke, they suddenly heard sounds of zombies nearby. Approaching, they saw a paralyzed zombie, and Maggie easily dispatched it. Daryl walked over to the other zombie and noticed that it had an arrow sticking out of it. He seems to have thought of something. Nightfall came. Daryl led Maggie to a school. This used to be Oceanside's residence. Daryl's suspicion fell on the group of women from Oceanside. It was likely that the missing members of the Saviors had been taken by them. The wounds on Justin's body are probably from a fish gun. As they approached the entrance, voices could be heard from inside. At that moment, Erat's head was being held at gunpoint. Daryl and Maggie came in with their weapons. Indeed, it was the group of women. Daryl lowered his weapon. He understood that these women were seeking revenge. Erat quickly pleaded for help from Daryl. Cindy sighed, saying that this place used to be their home. Her mother and grandmother had found this place for their group. They used to have a lot of people here. Men, women, children, everyone believed in a hopeful future. However, the Saviors arrived. Simon wants their supplies. This woman gave the order. The Saviors killed all their men, including her brother. Later, they fled and took refuge by the seaside. Then your people found us and asked us to join in resisting the Saviors. We gave you guns and fought alongside you. Rick eventually ended the war, urging everyone to let go of their hatred. They didn't oppose because they had no choice, until Maggie hanged Gregory, which made them realize that Rick's rules weren't the only ones. Maggie pointed them in a different direction. Eventually, Daryl and Maggie left, deciding not to reveal this information. No one had the right to tell them to let go of their hatred, as they themselves couldn't. Glenn, Abraham, Sasha, Who could forgive for them? Arat continued to plead from behind, but she had to face the consequences of her past actions. Was Rick's approach right? Nobody could say for sure. Meanwhile, Jotties returned to a familiar place. It seemed that Morgan had already left. Then, Jotties opened a concealed box, revealing an object wrapped inside. The walkie-talkie she used to contact the mysterious person. Last night, while on duty, Jotties saw a helicopter nearby. So, she tried to contact them again. Soon, a man's voice came through. It turned out Jotties had been wanting to leave with the mysterious person. The condition was to provide them with an A or B. I'm guessing that A and B refer to people, just different types of people. Suddenly, Jotties realized someone was behind her. It was Gabriel. Jotties doesn't tell the truth, just that she was doing something bad. But what happened to the saviors had nothing to do with her. She didn't want to deceive Gabriel. She said she genuinely wanted to fit in with their group. But as he had seen, the moment something went wrong, people suspected her, even Rick. Today, when the saviors charged at her, everyone stood aside except for him. Jotties extended her hand toward Gabriel, and he held it. She continued, saying he must promise not to tell anyone about this, consider it helping themselves, and in the end, they would have an unparalleled life. Gabriel shook his head after listening. He wasn't someone blinded by love. Rick had accepted him despite his past mistakes, so Gabriel couldn't keep this from Rick. Moreover, Gabriel had a sense that Jotties' deal might endanger the group. Jotties understood Gabriel's stance and, without further insistence, knocked him unconscious. The next day, with no news of Arat, the saviors left as expected. Rick had no reason to stop them. Daryl and Maggie had yet to return. As Maggie had a new plan, she intended to secretly travel to Alexandria's safe zone and kill Negan. Maggie has always held her hatred deep in her heart because of Rick, and now the Oceanside people have inspired Maggie. Naturally, Daryl supported Maggie. He would stay behind to stall Rick. The woman stared blankly at the bustling scene of the hilltop. A year and more having passed since the defeat of the saviors, Maggie kept asking herself if she could truly move on from Glenn's death. The answer was a resounding no, and now Oceanside's secret killing of the saviors has inspired Maggie. So it's time to end the feud. On the other side, the saviors' people keep disappearing and they can't even find any clues, so they're leaving en masse. Rick could only watch helplessly as the saviors left. Later, Rick stood by the bridge, gazing at the river's increasingly turbulent waters, a sign that the rising tide was approaching. The bridge will not be able to hold up without a fixed bridge. Rick had hoped Eugene could find a solution, but Eugene explained that they lacked the manpower. Repairing the bridge before the tide came was practically impossible, especially with two massive herds of walkers roaming nearby. And that wasn't the worst part. Carol was preparing to lead the people of the kingdom away, as staying behind held little purpose anymore. Rick asked about the fate of the Salvation Hall, reminding Carol that she was their interim leader, but Carol replied, "Do you really think they need a leader? Most of them don't want us telling them what to do. They'll decide who they want to be, and there's nothing we can do to interfere." Rick could only nod in understanding. Yesterday, they were all together, working towards a common goal with laughter and camaraderie. Today, they were parting ways. Was his approach the right one? As Rick pondered, Jerry rode up on his horse, delivering news from the hilltop. Maggie had gone to the Alexandria safe zone. According to Jesus, Rick needed to know, and he said, "You'll understand what it means." Rick realized that Maggie must have gone to kill Negan. He immediately used his walkie-talkie to contact the Alexandria safe zone relay station, instructing them to relay a message to delay Maggie. Daryl was eating and watching the scene. What Rick doesn't know is that on the other end of that walkie-talkie is this Oceanside kid. They were also going to cover Maggie. Daryl pretended not to know what was happening and approached Rick to inquire. Rick shared Maggie's plan before preparing to ride back. Daryl offered Rick a ride on his motorcycle, suggesting it would be quicker. They set off, Daryl pushing the speed as if genuinely in a rush. At an intersection, Daryl suddenly turned the other way. Rick sensed something was wrong and urgently told Daryl to stop the bike.
Pull over!
What is this? You know exactly what this is. This time, man, it's gonna go the way it was supposed to. You messed with the relay? Yeah, that message didn't go through.
Just as Rick was about to use the walkie-talkie to reconnect with the relay station, Daryl knocked it out of his hand. The two brothers engaged in a physical altercation again, resulting in them being thrown about. When they looked up, they saw a massive pit, at least 7 to 8 meters deep. This is really bad. The walls of the pit were smooth, and Rick's attempts to climb out were in vain. Frustrated, he let out an expletive. To Rick, Negan's death meant repeating past mistakes and rendering the previous war futile. Daryl doesn't care about Rick's nationalistic views. He just knows that Negan's death is good for Maggie. Rick continued, explaining that he understood Maggie's perspective. She hadn't set foot in the Alexandria safe zone since the war's victory and had even hanged Gregory. The reasons were clear, and Rick wasn't blind to them. And Daryl's direct rebuttal is that you're not blind, but you're pretending not to be. He reminded Rick that if not for Glenn, he wouldn't have survived this long, found his wife, located Carl, or met any of them. All of this was thanks to Glenn. Had Rick forgotten?
Keeping him alive is how we make sure it won't!
No. Keeping him alive is giving him hope that it will.
Michonne talked to her. She came to camp. She was coming around.
Yeah, well, she was trying. The truth is, she just couldn't live with it. Just like Oceanside.
Oceanside. You saying Oceanside killed those saviors? Harrod.
I'm saying they got what they deserved.
You knew, and you didn't say anything.
Truth is, I couldn't live with it either.
If this doesn't work, if she kills Negan, he becomes a martyr. The war was for nothing. Every person who died for nothing. Carl died for nothing.
What about the rest of us? You don't think after all the shit we've been through, we couldn't handle it?
You know that's not true.
Truth is, you don't have enough faith in us, asking us to have faith in all these other people. And I would have died for Carl, died for you. You know that. Chasing something for him that ain't meant to be, man. But you gotta hear me. Let him go. You just gotta let him go.
I never asked anyone to fall.
I know. Maybe you should have.
While the two brothers were arguing, inside the bridge repair camp, Carol is organizing the evacuation when she sees what looks like movement in the woods. The saviors had returned. The man leading them had acquired a handgun. They came back because they figured out Oceanside killed their man. So they came back for revenge. Carol won't budge. The men taunted her. You're just a weak woman who got lucky. The strongest woman on Rick's team is being called weak. One day the men would learn what Carol was capable of. Carol lowered her gun as if she was truly compromised. The men came forward and took the keys to their weaponized car.
It's gonna draw those herds.
Let's back to the camp.
Realizing the urgency of the situation, they needed to escape quickly. The camp had devolved into chaos. Daryl urged Rick to use his strength to climb out first. The first attempt failed, but the second time, Rick managed to grasp a tree root above. But at this moment, there were even zombies walking towards the pit from above, and there was more than one of them. Thankfully, Rick dodged just in time. Daryl was taking care of zombies below. Rick tried the root next to him. It was very strong. He asked Daryl to try to grab it. Daryl immediately stacked up the zombie's body and stepped on it and slowly started to climb up. But, during this process, zombies kept falling down continuously. Slowly more and more zombies below them. Zombies reached out their hands towards them, just waiting for them to fall down. Rick successfully climbed up, but as he steadied himself, he froze upon hearing the distant roars of a zombie horde. The gunfire must have drawn them. Rick needed to pull Daryl up quickly. Daryl is in a very precarious position. Falling meant certain doom. Rick grabbed a branch and extended his hand to pull Daryl. Daryl's situation was precarious, but he managed to hold on. Rick exerted all his strength, giving one last powerful tug that finally brought Daryl up to safety. Before they could catch their breath, the zombie horde had arrived, dispatching two zombies. The brothers sprinted toward the motorcycle. As they walked along the road, Rick spotted the white horse that had bolted from the camp, and a plan formed in his mind. He urged Daryl to leave quickly, deciding to stay behind himself and lead the horde of zombies away on horseback.
What? I'm staying.
No, man!
The river. Giving up on it, not yet.
Take him to the bridge. It ain't ever gonna hold him. They'll get washed out. There ain't no other way, man.
I'm not destroying the bridge. Slicing the bridge. I'll find another way. We need it.
Seeing that Rick was so determined, Daryl didn't say anything else but to pray for his good brother in his heart. But Daryl, who who was always cold, said something rare.
You too. Hey. Be safe.
But they did not expect that this word of concern would be their last conversation, and at the junkyard, Gabriel was tied to a flatbed truck. Jody's plans to use the zombies to turn Gabriel into one of them, as it is the only way for him to join the mysterious organization. From this, it could be deduced that the enigmatic A mentioned by the mysterious person might refer to the infected humans. Back when Jody's captured Negan, it was likely for the same purpose. Despite his fear, Gabriel recounted his past experiences to Jody's. Jody's listened to his with a look of sadness. She really wanted to be with Gabriel for the rest of her life. In the end, Jody's couldn't bear to do it, but Jody's put a piece of cloth over Gabriel's mouth and nose until he passed out. When Gabriel awoke again, the junkyard was empty. No matter how he called out, there was no response. However, a farewell letter remained in his clothing. Meanwhile, Rick rode the white horse, leading the zombies forward, but upon reaching a crossroads, he realized he had oversimplified the situation. Another massive horde of zombies was approaching from a different direction. The convergence of these two hordes was beyond his control. The once calm horse beneath Rick grew restless, sensing the aura of death. The zombies drew nearer, and the horse grew increasingly agitated, eventually throwing Rick off. What followed were agonizing screams. Rick was thrown onto a slab of stone and a steel bar pierced his body. This is bad. The zombies from both directions are about to converge, and Rick couldn't use his strength at the moment. Gradually, his consciousness began to fade. Could it be that today was his day of reckoning? A man, impaled on a slab of stone with rebars skewering through him, was surrounded by countless zombies closing in. Rick desperately struggled to break free, but his strength seemed useless. Slowly, his consciousness began to blur. When Rick regained consciousness, he found himself lying in a hospital bed. Gazing at his former self lying there, it was as if he was trapped in a loop. The current Rick was wounded in the abdomen. Once again.
Yeah, wake up, asshole.
Suddenly, Rick snapped awake from his dream. The zombie horde had come to a place only 2 or 3 meters away from him. He tried to free himself, but his efforts were futile. As he gazed at the distant horde of zombies, Rick remained calm and contemplated every possible solution. Finally, he swiftly removed his belt and looped it around the rebar jutting from his head. The convergence of these two massive hordes would be an immensely terrifying force. Enduring the pain, Rick laboriously climbed onto the back of a horse. The white horse is also in a state of shock and panic, almost walking into the zombies. Thankfully, Rick tightly pulled the reins, turned the horse around, and managed to escape the danger, but the bumps on the back of the horse made Rick's wounds painful. Coupled with the loss of blood may at any time unconsciousness, Rick can only use the perseverance to hold on to not fall down. On the road not far from there, a car broke down and came to a stop. It was Jody's. She left without saying goodbye. At this moment, the mysterious person contacted Jody's through the radio, inquiring about her location and the status of Item A. Jody's had spared Gabriel, so she had no bargaining chip in her hands. Yet, she replied that she had prepared Item A for him on an empty space by the riverbank. Jody's was unsure where to find another item now, but she had an alternative plan in mind. Rick continued riding the horse, his blood staining the horse's back. Rick's consciousness began to blur again, as if he was seeing the farm he used to live on, the scene before the disaster when he was shot, and the hospital. But Rick came round in time. The white horse nearly lost direction again, prompting Rick to suppress the excruciating pain and urge the horse to run once more. After a while, the blood from Rick's abdomen had clotted. He was pushing forward solely on willpower. Thankfully, he reached a crossroads. Rick once again lifted up his spirit and quickly ran in the direction of the side road. Escaping from the zombies was the ultimate goal. After walking for a while, Rick finally reached a small house. Rick just wanted to go in and hide for a while, even if he had time to treat his wounds. The first thing Rick did upon entering was not to check for zombies but to quickly grab a piece of cloth and tightly wrap it around his waist. Otherwise, even if he managed to escape being eaten by zombies, he might still succumb to excessive bleeding. With this makeshift bandage secured, Rick leaned back in a chair and drifted into a deep sleep. In his dream, Rick saw himself riding a white horse once again, just like his first time in Atlanta. However, this time he was followed by thousands of zombies. He saw the same crumbling city. Waiting for him was his good friend Shane. Sitting together as they used to, chatting and enjoying hamburgers, Shane playfully inquired about Rick's beloved daughter, Judith, and whether her eyes resembled his. Instead of anger, Rick responded with banter, as if they had returned to their days of duty together. They let go of their past conflicts and reconciled. Rick woke up abruptly. Zombies already pouncing on him. Fortunately, he regained consciousness in time to push them away and use a table as a barrier to break through the boarded-up door, allowing him to escape. Thankfully, the decayed state of the wooden planks made them brittle enough for Rick to break through. Otherwise, he wouldn't have stood a chance in his current state. The zombie horde is so powerful it can crush anything. Rick struggled to mount the horse and dashed into the nearby woods. On the other side, Maggie had successfully reached the Alexandria safe zone. She intended to go to the basement and kill Negan, but Michonne intervened. As Rick's wife, Michonne felt responsible for looking out for his interests. Maggie, however, brushed aside Michonne's reasoning and told her plainly that she only wanted to do one thing: see the killer of Glenn dead. "Are you trying to take this right from me?" she asked Michonne. "What if Negan had killed Rick instead of Glenn?" She continued, "What would you do then? If your child was born without a father because of that monster, I bet you'd have killed Negan long ago. So don't pretend that I have a choice. Don't pretend that I can let go of this hatred. I want to ask you, who can let go?" Michonne listened without knowing how to respond. As a woman, she knew exactly how Maggie felt. In the end, Michonne handed over the keys and decided not to interfere any longer. She had no reason to stop Maggie. Maggie meets Negan again in the cell and the guy is still calm. Negan overhears their conversation and knows that Maggie is here to kill him. Instead of begging for mercy, Negan recounted the gruesome details of Glenn's death and taunted, "Did you finally muster up the courage to come here? Took you long enough." Maggie was filled with anger. She told Negan to kneel down and die. Surprisingly, Negan cooperated with Maggie and told her to hurry up and do it. Now Maggie is a bit confused. Is it possible that Negan has some kind of conspiracy? Negan continued to beg Maggie to end his life. Over and over.
You kill me!
Move into the light.
Maggie could no longer bear it and swung the door open, rushing in to throw Negan out. Negan had been locked up for over a year, and his health wasn't what it used to be. During this time, his mental state had also deteriorated. He could die in battle, but he didn't want to rot in this little house.
Please kill me.
Why?
So I can be with Lucille! I have to be dead. I can't be like this. And it's supposed to be you. I should be dead. It has to be you. Just settle it. I can't do it. I've tried. I can't. Please don't make me stay like this. Settle me. Kill me.
Get back in your cell.
Maggie's heart was heavy, fueled with anger. She had expected to finally bring closure today, but looking at Negan, who was as good as dead, Maggie suddenly didn't want to do anything. Why should she help this guy out? He doesn't deserve it.
You're already worse than dead. That settles it.
Negan entered the cell again, muttering some words. Gone was the dominant figure he once portrayed. Instead, he seemed like an old man on the brink of salvation. Maggie walked out of the basement. Michonne, who was waiting outside, hadn't heard any sounds of struggle. Furthermore, there was no blood on Maggie's weapon, which left Michonne puzzled. Approaching Michonne, Maggie locked eyes with her. Maggie's furrowed brow was relaxed. Her mind was open. They haven't had a chance to say anything.
Maggie, Michonne, something's up with you.
Rick's side is still holding up. The zombies continue to follow him. Rick would love to just ignore it and sleep, but deep in his heart there was always a voice telling him that he could not fall now. He had to lure them away. But soon, the sensation of dizziness overcame him once again. This time, Rick was on horseback, passed out. and in his sleep he returned to that beautiful farm. He met Herschel, the respected elder. Rick opened up about the hardships of his journey, pouring out his grievances as if speaking to a parent, sharing all the bitterness and hardships.
I'm so sorry for what happened to you. For everything Maggie's lost. To Beth and Glenn.
My girl, she's strong. And my grandson, he'll only make her stronger.
I need to find my family.
You ain't gotta worry about her.
I need to keep them together.
I know it's been hard. No, you don't.
It has.
Everything Rick had done had been for his family, but now his wife is dead, Carl is dead, Glenn and Shane are all dead.
Maybe I can find them here.
You have to wake up.
Awakening from this vision, Rick glanced around and realized that the situation was still dire. Waking up wouldn't magically make everything better. Before he could take more than a few steps, Rick collapsed again. This time, his consciousness returned to the hospital. Standing before that same door, the sign on the door read, "Do not open, zombies inside." The previous Rick had been scared away, but now he wanted to open it and see. But as soon as he opened the door, a white light enveloped Rick so he couldn't see what was inside. But Rick chose to go in anyway. When his vision cleared, the scene before him was shocking, a space filled with countless bodies. At his feet lay Negan, Tyrese, Herschel, and even Daryl, Jodies, Michonne, all of them dead. Rick walks amongst them, and for a moment he's lost. Throughout his life, Rick had fought for his family, for his friends, but in the end, they were all gone. Why had this happened? At that moment, a figure appeared behind Rick, a person who had long since passed away, Sasha.
They're all dead.
It's okay.
How can it be okay?
Yeah. I know.
How can this be okay?
Sasha told Rick that he didn't need to blame himself, for he had done all he could, just like she had, like those who had sacrificed before them. Everyone had given their all. Listening to Sasha's comforting words, Rick's tormented heart eased somewhat.
What you need to do, it's about all of us, is wake up.
Back in reality, Rick fell from the horse. The white horse had disappeared into the forest. Struggling to his feet, Rick looked around and realized that the horse had brought him back to the campsite. But this time, there were only lifeless bodies. He didn't see Carol and the others. Rick's original intention was to lead the zombie horde away from the campsite and the bridge. However, the white horse had led him here instead. His wound was still bleeding. A few familiar zombies came into Rick's view, the Savior's workers. The previous gunfire had evidently taken its toll. The zombies came towards Rick. He could only pick up his pistol and aim at the first zombie that came near him, then the second. The third zombie was a member of Oceanside. Many followed Rick because of his indomitable spirit. Others would have perished by now. Noticing the trees in the distance rustling, Rick realized that the horde had caught up. There's nothing but tall trees that can withstand it for a moment. Rick was exhausted and yearned to rest, but it wasn't the time. He had to keep moving with his grievous injury. Without his white horse, Rick's speed was slow. The zombies were hot on his heels. If Rick ran out of strength or fainted again, he would be devoured by the countless zombies. The man is seriously injured and there are thousands of zombies behind him. Rick, now losing blood and exhausted from walking, couldn't continue much longer. Not much further. Rick's consciousness became blurred, and his feet began to float. Finally, he collapsed once again. Rick had reached the large bridge. Looking back at the countless zombies, a sense of desolation swept over him, with his strength waning, and as he was about to rest, Daryl's voice roused him. Rick turned to see that everyone had arrived. Rushing towards the zombies, Michonne quickly came over to Rick to check on his injuries and told him not to worry, they would save him. Rick shook his head and said, Michonne could only offer continuous comfort. Urging Rick to hold on, she said, "Do you know why I fell in love with you? Because you're a fighter, never giving up, so fight for all of us." Rick woke up again, still lying on the bridge, zombies still trailing behind. Though the previous scene was a dream, seeing everyone gave Rick a newfound understanding. This bridge was thought by Rick to be the way to the future. Only now did he realize that the future wasn't the bridge. It was everyone who was still alive. With these thoughts in mind, Rick decided to lead the zombies onto the bridge and let the river wash them away. His severely injured body, Stumbling steps. Rick wasn't much faster than the zombies. His abdominal blood had soaked his clothes, dripping down with each step he took. Rick was tired all the time. Since waking up in the hospital, he hadn't truly lived for himself, constantly on edge. His thoughts were always about ensuring the survival of his family and friends. It wasn't until he became mates with Michonne that he began to have a life of his own. Soon enough, Rick unsteadily made it to the other side of the bridge. Now he waited for the zombies to reach the wooden planks, but the planks were stronger than he expected and didn't collapse as expected. Now he was at a loss. On the other side of the bridge lay the hilltop, and the consequences of such a massive horde of zombies crossing were unimaginable. Rick found himself without a solution. He could feel his endurance waning, his steps slowing down. Rick turned around and saw his dear friends approaching. Michonne and the others were there too. Seeing his loved ones, Rick's eyes welled up with tears. Being able to see everyone before his death meant that he had no regrets. Rick wanted to shout at them not to come closer. The number of zombies was just too overwhelming, but his weakened body couldn't muster a loud cry. As the zombies closed in, Rick, despite the excruciating pain, staggered forward to kill them. More zombies needed to gather on the wooden planks to have a chance at collapsing them. Daryl could only provide covering fire for his dear friend from a distance. At that moment, a zombie bumped a box on the bridge, revealing explosives inside. An idea flashed through Rick's mind to blow up the bridge. Michonne and the others ran to the zombies' side, attempting to lure them away. They noticed Rick's actions.
I found him.
As the explosion echoed through the sky, the bridge shattered. Tears welled in Daryl's eyes. The explosion was massive. Although Rick wasn't at the center of the explosion, his severe injuries made his chances of survival slim. The explosion triggered radio transmissions from all directions. They all know that Rick blew up the bridge to stop the zombies, including Jotties, who was waiting in the distance to make the deal. Learning of Rick's presumed demise weighed heavily on her. After all, he had accepted her when she was alone, while lost in thought. Jotties noticed a helicopter appearing in the sky behind her. Jotties hastily pulled out her pistol, and in the absence of a trade item, she was prepared to coerce her opponent into taking her away by force. That's when Jotties notices the bodies of zombies floating inside in the river water. So you can imagine the gruesomeness on the bridge. Wait, there's a blood-red figure on the bank. A suspicion formed in Jotties' mind. The helicopter hovered above Jotties' head. With just a quick glance, she rushed to the riverbank to investigate. Then a look of surprise came over Jotties' face. It was Rick, and he was alive. The mysterious person warned Jotties to abandon any tricks, as her agreed-upon plan seemed to have shifted from A to B. Jotties, earnestly, assured that this wasn't a trap and threw her gun to the ground to prove it. Jotties had initially intended to use force against the mysterious person, and Rick's appearance unexpectedly turned him into her ticket, a win-win situation where she could save Rick as well. There was no response on the radio, but the helicopter began to descend slowly. It is surmised that A, as the mystery man calls it, is a newly infected human, and B is some kind of special population. No one knew that Jotties had brought Rick onto the helicopter, heading towards an unknown destination. Ultimately, whether Rick could survive and reunite with his people was now in the hands of fate. When the aftermath of the explosion had settled, everyone searched along the river for any trace of Rick. Despite witnessing the devastating explosion, a glimmer of hope persisted in their hearts, especially in Michonne's. On the third day, Michonne had combed the riverbank, killing numerous zombies, but she hadn't found any sign of Rick. However, she did discover his revolver buried in the sandy soil. 6 months later, Michonne was still searching, her belly now prominently rounded. That's right, Michonne was pregnant with Rick's baby. The others gave up after a month, because everyone knew Rick was dead, or he'd be back. Michonne couldn't accept it without finding his body, clinging to that last thread of hope. And of course, so did one other person, Daryl. For half a year, Daryl hadn't returned to Alexandria's safe zone but had traveled far and wide along the river, still searching for Rick. With these words, this is the true essence of brotherhood. Like Rick, Daryl had been living for others all this time.
I think I'll stop living.
You don't need to do that.
Whatever.
The following day, some strangers arrived outside the gates of Alexandria's safe zone. With Rick absent, Michonne temporarily assumed the role of leader. Scott explained that he had spotted this group of children wandering nearby. The adults were injured, so he brought them back. Michonne turned to look and found it hard to believe. The woman across from her was equally surprised. They had been the best of friends 15 years ago, and now they had crossed paths in this apocalypse. Naturally, the lady called Joselyn was well entertained and her injuries treated, but she seemed eager to leave, claiming that others were waiting for her. Michonne could only console her old friend, encouraging her to speak up if she had any difficulties. It turned out that Joselyn led a group of children and had some still waiting for her return outside. Knowing this, Michonne, accompanied by Rosita and others, ventured out to investigate. Inside a dimly lit house, they found several children as Joselyn had described. From then on, Joselyn and her group of children stayed in Alexandria's safe zone. These children are so capable that they can hunt alone and handle the ingredients. The children of Alexandria's safe zone enjoyed their time with them, engaging in storytelling and games. The atmosphere was harmonious. Michonne felt at ease allowing Judith and a few other kids to play with them. Sometimes, when the play got too tiring, they would spend the night at Joselyn's house. But one morning, a week later, several parents came to Joselyn's house to pick up their children, as usual, and knocked on the door, but there was no response. When they came in, the house was empty. No matter how much they shouted, there was no response. Growing anxious, they split up to search. Scott, entering the storage room, was taken aback. The shelves were stripped of food. He urgently called for Michonne, as the person guarding the storage room had been killed. Another woman rushed over to report that the infirmary had suffered the same fate, completely ransacked. Michonne noticed bloodstains on the floor that led to a manhole cover. It was Michonne who told Joselyn the secret of the sewer entrance. Michonne realized she had made a grave mistake. Judith and several children had been taken by them. Despite her pregnancy, Michonne joined Daryl to search for them. She couldn't fathom how her friend had turned into this. Not only did she steal, but she killed people and took children from the community. Following Daryl's tracking skills, they come to an abandoned school. As soon as Michonne got there, she spotted the child who had been following Joselyn. The child's demeanor had changed. No longer gentle, the child now brandished a knife with a cold, distant gaze. Then the child dashed off in another direction. Michonne pursued the child into a building, while Daryl, hearing the commotion, silently entered as well. He turned a corner just in time to witness Michonne and the children in a standoff. Michonne reluctantly lowered her weapon. She wanted to check on Daryl but was struck by the child and knocked unconscious. When they woke up again, they found themselves suspended. They didn't care that Michonne was pregnant. One of them took a red-hot iron and burned Daryl on the back. All these cruel actions had been taught by Joselyn. Joselyn had deliberately gathered so many children, exploiting others' compassion and using them to obtain resources. She indoctrinated them with the belief that in the apocalypse, only the strong survive. Soon after, the children heated the branding iron again. When the men went out, Daryl used his experience to defeat the guards and drop Michonne. They decided to split up in their quest to find Judith and the other missing children. Michonne walks quietly up the stairs with a steel pipe just as Joselyn comes out with some children. The young boy immediately blew a whistle hanging around his neck. Several children quickly moved Judith and the others through the back door, locking it behind them. Joselyn ordered 2 children to kill Michonne and left the scene herself. Michonne didn't want to harm the children, so she simply pushed them away. However, the young girl attempted to kill Michonne. As Michonne bent down to pick up a knife from the ground, the young boy seized the opportunity and slashed her abdomen. This unexpected attack shocked Michonne, but fortunately, the wound wasn't deep. Michonne wanted to kill the boy with a stick, but she refrained. She just picked up her long knife, realizing they were outmatched. The 2 children fled. Michonne attempted to open the back door, but it was locked. Michonne had to quickly get to the front door, worried about Judith. Michonne lost her usual caution. Michonne just comes out and gets clubbed down by Joselyn, who then whacks Michonne hard with a wooden baton. Michonne quickly used her back to shield herself from the blows. Judith and the other children were taken into a caravans. Seizing an opportunity, Michonne retrieved her katana and thrust it through Joselyn's leg before delivering a fatal blow. This woman was no longer the friend Michonne had known. She was unworthy of living in this world. Witnessing Joselyn's death, the remaining children grabbed weapons and approached Michonne cautiously. Michonne reassured them that they could return to Alexandria's safe zone, where everyone would take care of them. However, the eldest boy among them ordered one child to kill Judith and instructed the others to restrain Michonne. Michonne killed the big boy. Her heart was in a bad place. Another child rushed at her, aiming for her abdomen again. Michonne had no choice but to swing her long knife. Even though she had 1,000 feelings, This was Michonne's bottom line. Only the boy who had stormed into the caravan remained. Michonne stopped him and warned him not to do it. The boy was frightened by Michonne's intensity and froze in place. Finally, the boy put away his knife and fled into the distance. The lovely Judith came out. Her eyes went to the bodies of the children and then to her mother, who was covered in blood. Judith froze in place instead of jumping on her. Michonne's heart sank. Did this mean Judith was distancing herself from her now? Daryl arrived, and the other children began to come out as well. Eventually, Michonne led the children back to Alexandria's safe zone, where waiting parents were relieved to see them unharmed. Following this incident, Alexandria's safe zone underwent significant reforms. The position of leader was abolished in favor of a committee. Gabriel was appointed chairman, with 6 members forming the committee. Michonne became the security chief, holding veto power over committee decisions. This event served as a wake-up call. The committee decided that from then on, Alexandria's safe zone would focus solely on the well-being of its residents. Though not what Rick and Carl had envisioned, their primary concern was protecting their loved ones from harm. Another year passed. The kingdom faced multiple challenges, and their crops yielded minimal harvests. They sought assistance from the Hilltop and Alexandria's safe zone. The Hilltop, led by Jesus, generously provided the requested aid. The Alexandria Safe Zone Committee also decided to help, but at Michonne's insistence, they only sent a very small amount, because Alexandria's Safe Zone had previously decided to be responsible only for its own people. However, Tara secretly brought additional supplies, intending to live at the Hilltop after this incident. Tara didn't want to go back to a community where friends faced difficulties, yet they refused to offer help. This event strained the relationship between Maggie and Michonne, causing the kingdom to distance themselves from Alexandria's safe zone. On an open plain, a woman is killing zombies. Apart from her, her companions are also fighting fiercely against the zombies. They are also unlucky. Their vehicle broke down shortly after arriving, and they were immediately surrounded by a horde of zombies. The taller woman with long hair was more fierce and killed 2 zombies in a row, but she was injured before and now she is a bit weak. The surrounding zombies are gradually closing in, while each of them is individually skilled in combat. Their teamwork is lacking. Rick's team, for instance, would never find themselves in such a situation. They would move back to back, taking down zombies and not giving them a chance to overwhelm them, just when they don't know which one to break out. At this moment, they don't care who saved them. The most important thing is to escape alive. Then they rushed through the opening in the breakout into the woods. As they ran, they stopped, because a little girl appeared in front of them. The little girl gave people a kind of clean and valiant feeling. She picks up the police hat on the ground and puts it on her head and proudly says her name.
Judith Grimes.
People from Alexandria's safe zone are desperately searching for her as they had gone out hunting and she disappeared in the blink of an eye. Upon hearing the call, Judith rushed out. Aaron was visibly relieved to see her unharmed. The group then notices that there are 5 unfamiliar individuals accompanying Judith. Eugene and the others look at them warily. The chubby man introduces himself as Luke and explains that Judith saved them. Aaron and the others are helpless at Judith's behavior in helping others. Rosita reminds Judith that they need to follow the rules. By this point, the pursuing zombies have caught up. The team of 5 is on alert. To everyone's surprise, Eugene to walk up with a cold face and pull out the knife on his belt. Clearly, the 5 years that have passed have seen Eugene's rapid growth. He is no longer the timid, submissive individual he used to be. He has transformed into a competent survivor. Several zombies are dispatched, but more are approaching. They have to leave the area first and decide what to do later. Judith, with her kind heart, wants to help them. She straightforwardly declares that if they don't leave, she won't either. Rosita and Aaron exchange a glance. Helpless, they can only agree with Judith's decision, and so, they lead the group towards Alexandria's safe zone. Yes, Judith has grown up. 5 years had passed since Rick blew up the bridge. Michonne still searches for Rick every day, never allowing herself to give up. Daryl, too, has been searching for Rick for the longest time, living in the jungle and following the river over and over again. Meanwhile, Aaron has returned to Alexandria's safe zone to prevent the 5 from remembering the route. They covered their heads with black bags. Then, Rosita guides them into the community. The 5 stand hesitantly outside, wary of the unknown. This caution is warranted. Judith, observing their hesitation, approaches and takes the woman's hand, assuring them that it's safe inside. The boy interprets in sign language because his sister is deaf. With Judith leading the way, they enter the community. The sight that greets them leaves them in awe. In this post-apocalyptic world, they've never seen anything like it before. They began to wonder if this was a dream. In reality, Alexandria's safe zone has been renamed the City of Alexandria. After 5 years of development, the community has expanded by more than triple its original size. They even welcomed a portion of the once notorious the Saviors, those with kind hearts. The population has surged dramatically. Now, they are self-sufficient, cultivating crops and vegetables, utilizing solar power for energy. If Deanna could see that, she'd be happy. Gabriel emerges from the church, exuding an air of maturity. Do any of you remember who Aaron's daughter is? The residents gather around to watch as well. Rosita asks Siddiq to check on the injured woman in the carriage. After assessing her condition, Siddiq decides to take her to the infirmary. Magna, the injured woman's companion, is uneasy and wants to go with her, but DJ stops her. DJ, who once belonged to the Saviors, joined Alexandria's safe zone later. These strangers won't be easily let inside the community. Just as they were in a standoff, a figure on horseback returned. It was Michonne. Naturally, Michonne noticed the new faces and walked towards them. Her face was stern, radiating an intangible sense of authority. Michonne scrutinized the newcomers, even searching Magna. Seeing her uncle being blamed, Judith rushed out to admit that it was her decision. Aaron also spoke up, thinking that these newcomers were not in danger. He believed their arrival was fated, and suggested their case be discussed in the council. Aaron is not in favor of the current Michonne. Because of the Joselyn incident, Michonne has become too cold. Gabriel, the head of the committee, also said that it's already late today and the committee will be convened in the morning. Michonne didn't say anything, but she had these people locked up.
Okay. Put them in holding.
Michonne is a different person than she was 4 years ago. The next morning, Alexandria's safe zone called a committee. Commissioner Gabriel, who was sitting in the center, began by saying that they hadn't had a newcomer for some time. He acknowledged their community's kindness and fairness, but also emphasized that they were not weak. If they wanted to join, they needed to answer questions and undergo a vote by the community. Gabriel then proceeded to question their origins, their occupations before the apocalypse, and so on. Representing the group was the portly Luke, a former music teacher before the apocalypse. The second woman, Magna, was a warrior. The third, Kelly, was a high school student. The woman next to her was Connie, Kelly's deaf sister. The injured woman in the infirmary was Yumiko. Luke shared their team's journey, asserting they had not engaged in any wicked deeds. They had been struggling to survive, experiencing the deaths of many companions along the way. 10 minutes passed as they answered questions from the council. The council members and residents present could sense that these individuals didn't seem malevolent. There was already a disposition to let them stay. However, at that moment, Michonne interrupted their decision-making process. Michonne stood up and spoke to everyone in the room. As a community, we want to be kinder, even more generous and compassionate, but we've learned painful lessons. Everyone needs to understand that the decisions we're about to make could have serious consequences. After speaking, Michonne approached the woman named Magna and asked her to show her left hand. Magna's hand had 3 black marks on it. Others were confused, not sure what this meant. Michonne raised Magna's hand and said, "Anyone with 3 marks on their hand indicates they were serious criminals before the apocalypse." People began to exchange glances. While a stint in jail doesn't make Magna a bad person, there is still some doubt in people's minds.
Just because she was a prisoner.
I can explain.
And you have nothing to hide.
Nothing.
Or you want to tell the truth? Yes. Put the knife on the table.
As Michonne spoke, the others felt uneasy. They all knew that Magna had a hidden knife on her belt. Michonne had done what she wanted to do and then asked everyone to start voting while she turned around and walked towards the outside.
Can I ask you a question?
No.
Given Magna's concealed knife, the outcome of the vote was unsurprising. They decided not to let them stay. However, they would wait for the injured Yumiko to recover before leaving. Magna isn't truly bad. She just finds it hard to trust others after surviving the apocalypse. Magna then goes to the window and sees the oppressive woman who is teaching Judith how to use a long knife. Magna felt a great deal of regret in this moment that they could not stay and live in such a nice place because of her. After the committee meeting, Gabriel went to the storage room to tinker with his wide-range radio. He wanted to use it to contact the survivors out there so they could come and live in the Alexandria safe zone. Currently, most committee members were open to accepting newcomers, but Michonne held veto power, making them quite powerless. During today's meeting, It was clear to everyone that Michonne intentionally stirred residents to vote against newcomers. Since the Joselyn incident, Michonne has become even more withdrawn and doesn't even try to help when the kingdom is in trouble. Gabriel's secret radio project was unknown to others. To increase the radio's range, they needed to install a signal amplifier on a distant vantage point. Rosita volunteered to install it, not for any other reason but because she and Gabriel were now a couple. In the afternoon, Rosita asked Eugene for help in installing the amplifier. Eugene had always been fond of attractive women. A long time ago, Eugene had feelings for Rosita, but she was with Abraham back then. Now, Eugene couldn't understand why Rosita was with Gabriel instead. So, Eugene indirectly remarked that there were too many physically strong but mentally simple men. Wondering why Rosita didn't consider better options, the meaning behind his words was clear, but Rosita pretended not to understand. As they were talking, something happened up ahead. The dirt was laid down by them, and the dense footprints on it indicated that an army of zombies was heading east. Fortunately, their destination was a tower to the west. 30 minutes later, Eugene reached the top of the tower and successfully installed the amplifier. Rosita confirmed everything was in order. Just as Eugene was about to come down, he saw a horde of zombies walking in the distance.
Sweet sassy Molassy.
Row! Herd!
Get your ass down, now!
Rosita tries to get the horses, but they get spooked and run away. Eugene accidentally dropped his backpack.
Shit.
What puzzled Eugene was how the zombies, who were originally headed east, had turned back. Little did they know, they were about to encounter a type of zombie they had never seen before. A man is installing a signal device atop a tower, not anticipating that a group of zombies is approaching in the distance. Rosita, who is on standby below, notices the approaching danger as well. However, the zombie horde is still a bit far from their location. After saying that, Rosita was going to prepare the carriage. Unfortunately, the two horses sense the danger and break free from their reins. Fleeing into the distance, Rosita cursed and could only quickly go to the carriage to pack her things. She plans to leave as soon as Eugene comes down. Meanwhile, Eugene is cautiously descending the stairs on the tower. As the zombies get closer over the next 5 minutes, he finally reaches the bottom. Eugene tries to kick away some obstructing vines but accidentally knocks over the ladder instead. Eugene didn't choose to call Rosita for help. Rosita rushes over to check on Eugene's condition. Eugene attempts to stand, but it's evident that his knee is injured, and he can't stand up properly. Rosita has no choice but to retrieve an iron shovel to serve as a makeshift crutch for Eugene. With the zombies just a few meters away, they need to hurry and escape. Let's let the two of them escape for a while. The scene shifts to the kingdom. 5 years later, where the population has grown. Carol, now with long hair, gazes below, and the issue of dwindling food supply still persists. Suddenly, a muffled sound comes from underground, prompting her and Jerry to quickly head down. You don't have to think about it to know that a pipe must have blown. The kingdom's challenges in rebuilding lie in the shortage of food and the deterioration of various equipment. When they arrive, they find a young man repairing the equipment, none other than a grown-up Henry. Henry seems skilled in repairing these devices. In a short time, he's managed to patch them up with duct tape, and the pressure levels are back to normal. Ezekiel also arrives, praising his son for the good job. Henry doesn't seem pleased by the praise, as this isn't what he wanted. Using plastic and tape for repairs isn't a satisfactory solution for him. Henry had long expressed a desire to become an apprentice blacksmith at the Hilltop to learn practical skills that could benefit the kingdom. However, his father consistently opposed the idea, leaving Henry frustrated and speaking with a tone of defiance. Once they leave the underground area, Henry practices the staff techniques taught by his mentor Morgan. It's clear that he's channeling his pent-up frustration. Ezekiel and Carol secretly watched Henry from a distance. Neither of them were Henry's biological parents, but they treated Henry as their own child. Henry referred to them as his mom and dad. Carol naturally understood the thoughts of this father and son duo. One wanted to learn skills to help rebuild their community, while the other was concerned about the long and dangerous journey to the Hilltop. Fearing for their child's safety on the road, when the bridge broke, it took the kingdom 2 or 3 times longer to travel to the top of the mountain. Finally, persuaded by Carol's arguments, Ezekiel agreed to let Henry go on the journey, just as eaglets must eventually face the heights alone. And with Carol as Henry's escort, Ezekiel found himself reassured. Then mother and son set off, with a load of vegetables. After all, the Hilltop has helped the kingdom a lot over the past 5 years. Just then a woman's cry for help came from the alley. Henry, the hot-headed young man, stopped the car and rushed out with a stick. Despite his mother's objections, Carol, rather helplessly, followed closely behind with her bow and arrow. This son is good at everything, but he's too hot-blooded. Henry followed the sound until he reached a narrow alley, where several burly men were harassing a woman.
My hero.
What Henry didn't expect was that this was all a trap. Carol arrived with her bow and arrow, her senses tingling with suspicion from the moment she heard the cry for help. The door behind Carol slowly opened and a familiar voice greeted her. These people are the saviors. Their trap had been set to steal the supplies from the cart. They're used to being fed. No one has cared about them since Rick blew up the bridge. So now they're left to fend for themselves, which is a bit miserable. The leader among them approached Carol, admitting they didn't enjoy resorting to such actions. However, they had fallen on hard times since the saviors disbanded. They used to have horses, but they were too hungry. Now they can only use zombies to capture. The leader recalled Carol sparing his life earlier and considered this a debt repaid. He announced that they wouldn't take the cart, and even left her with the stick. Everything else was to be theirs. Without hesitation, Carol agreed, urging them to take what they wanted. Henry, baffled by this, couldn't understand. The leader then noticed the ring on Carol's hand and demanded she hand it over. Henry couldn't stand it anymore. This is his parents' wedding ring. Witnessing his son being pushed to the ground, Carol swiftly stepped in, protecting Henry. Then she took off the ring and handed it to the man. The man took the ring and put it on his hand, and flippantly teased Carol about her nice hair. Having obtained what they desired, the saviors departed. Due to the long journey, they had to stop and spend the night along the way. Henry expressed his confusion, saying, "I don't understand why you didn't resist. You used to be so strong." Carol replied calmly, "There's no need." Henry retorted, "There's right and wrong in the world. Punishing evil and promoting good. Upholding justice. That's what you taught me. You used to act that way. So why have you changed now?" Carol responded tenderly, "Because of you. You'll understand one day." Henry had no further words, just lying down in frustration to sleep. Carol, on the other hand, looked at her finger. The ring she had been wearing for 5 years was no longer there. In the deep night, the full moon hung high in the sky. Inside a grass hut, the saviors slept peacefully, unaware of a figure entering their dwelling. By this time, the floor had been doused with gasoline. The smell awoke the man, who realized something was on him.
Wait.
The ring I could let go? People who went out and never came back. That stuff belonged to people I knew.
I swear you'll never see us again. We found that stuff. We didn't do anything.
I know. You hurt my son.
The flames spread instantly along the gasoline, engulfing the sleeping figures. The screams echoed through the room. This was the Carol we knew, the warrior. She never hesitated to eliminate those who deserved it, especially those who had harmed her son. Her silver hair glowed in the fire's light, accentuating her formidable presence. In the Alexandria safe zone, some people couldn't sleep either. It was the 4 individuals brought back earlier by Judith during the day. They were discussing the events involving the dagger. Magna explains that she just wanted to keep it for protection and didn't realize the woman was so powerful. At this moment, Luke asked Magna to hand over the necklace, as it also concealed a blade. Reluctantly, Magna handed it over, only to retract her hand immediately. She knew how crucial it was to stay here, outside, with no supplies and no cart. Death could come at any moment, maybe kill the woman quietly. Luke said they've already helped us. They had been living outside for a long time and managed to survive. Connie comes up to Magna and tells her that they can't be such jerks about it. Repaying kindness with cruelty wasn't their way. There must be a reason these people managed to survive. They shouldn't provoke that woman. Tomorrow, when Yumiko wakes up, they'll leave. It was their fate. Magnus still held onto her reluctance, stating that their fallen comrades had all hoped for a place like this, and now it was right in front of them. Luke's temper flared as well.
Listen to her, okay? She's right. We got little kids here. You want to fight debate style? Cool. All right, you want to fight? I say let's save it for somebody who deserves it, right? Yes? I get a yes vote on that? Yes. Kelly? Yes. Majority rules. Hand it over now.
Finally, Magna didn't say anything. In the latter part of the night, Magna stealthily approached Michonne's door and caught a glimpse of Michonne inside. Magna was still reluctant for everyone to continue wandering and was prepared to kill Michonne. Just as Magna was about to open the door, she witnessed Michonne holding her son. The image made Magna freeze in her tracks. Magna recalled Connie's words from earlier, and then she knocked softly on Michonne's door.
You missed one. You're right about me.
Thank you.
I've done things. Terrible things. If I had all this, I wouldn't trust me either.
It isn't always that easy to live with. Or else we wouldn't be here. We've all done things.
Michonne, who had closed the door, was now contemplating. At that moment Michonne remembered that Rick had done the same thing to her the first time she went to prison. Just then, Michonne spotted Judith sitting on the stairs. Though young, Judith understood everything. She wanted her mom to let down her guard, believing that if Dad were still alive, he would have helped them. The next morning, Yumiko woke up, signaling that they had to leave. After last night's conversation, Magna accepted it with open arms. Sometimes, one must stand by their principles. As they were getting ready to leave, Michonne arrived on horseback. She addressed the group, saying that the plan had changed. There's a place much like this one, and their leader there will welcome them. I'll personally escort you. When the time comes, I'll talk to him, Michonne added. Siddiq naturally understood that Michonne was referring to the Hilltop. Furthermore, Michonne asked Siddiq to accompany them to help tend to the sick. Kelly quickly translated this for her sister. Connie was smarter and knew that this little guy must have done something to make the cold Michonne willing to help them. On the road to the Hilltop, Carol was also making her way. Henry apologized to his mother for his tone and attitude the previous day. Carol reassured him, saying that it's okay and that his safety matters more than anything. At that moment, Henry suddenly saw the ring on his mom's hand and understood what was going on. Without an explanation, Carol simply smiled at Henry. As they continued walking, Carol deviated from the route, and Henry was unsure where his mother was heading. Suddenly, a man appeared before them.
Need a ride, stranger?
None other than Daryl. Meanwhile, in a forest, Rosita and Eugene were still on the run. This time the zombies are surprisingly scary and have been tracking them all night. Eugene couldn't run anymore and told Rosita he can't hold her back any longer. He was willing to stay and hold off the zombies so Rosita could escape. However, there was something he had kept buried within himself for a long time, and now he wanted to muster the courage to tell her. Before he could speak, Rosita firmly silenced him, telling him that they can make their escape. The two of them hurriedly arrived at the water's edge, quickly covering themselves with mud. Now, how can they care about their image? The most important thing is to survive. A horde of zombies trailed closely behind them, having tracked them for a full day and night. Soon enough, the zombie horde passed overhead, causing Eugene and Rosita's scalps to tingle, as they overheard zombies communicating and speaking to each other. It was almost unbelievable and led them to question if they were mistaken. Fortunately, their hiding spot was well concealed, and the zombies didn't detect them. An hour later, Rosita ventured off alone. The zombie horde's odd behavior had prompted her to hide the injured Eugene before seeking help. As Rosita opened her backpack, intending to take a sip of water, she found it empty. The relentless fleeing had exhausted her both physically and mentally, with the zombies' conversations replaying in her mind. Ultimately, her energy depleted, and she collapsed on the ground. In the previous episode, it was mentioned that Michonne would be escorting the group of 5 to the Hilltop. But before she does, Michonne is going to go to the place where Judith met them, to see if there's any truth to their claim that the car broke down. The 5-person group was still apprehensive, unsure of what kind of place they were heading to. Yumiko directed a question toward Michonne, asking about the Hilltop. Michonne's response remained cool as she assured them, "I haven't been there in years, but I promised my daughter that I would get you there safely. You have to trust me." The team of 5 were even more apprehensive. They had already imagined the Hilltop to be a bad place. Little did they know that 5 years had passed, and the Hilltop had flourished, with advanced agriculture, expanded farmland, animal husbandry, blacksmithing, and the addition of a doctor like Enid. The residents enjoyed a simple yet stable life. making it a rare paradise in the apocalypse. Since the last time she assisted the kingdom, Tara hadn't returned to Alexandria's safe zone but had taken up management responsibilities at the Hilltop. People held Tara in high regard for her capabilities. What came as a surprise was that 2 years ago, Maggie had stepped down from her leadership position and left the Hilltop with her son. She would occasionally send back a letter or two. Of course, the burden of leadership fell on Jesus, and he was overwhelmed by the workload. Afterward, Jesus went out alone on horseback to clear his mind. In a sudden twist, he was tackled to the ground by a figure. The two grappled amidst the grass, and the attacker turned out to be Aaron. Over the past couple of years, Aaron had secretly visited the Hilltop to learn combat skills from Jesus. He had become a match for Jesus in skill. After their sparring, they found a spot to share some wine. Truth be told, over these years, the kingdom had twice sought help from their two communities. However, Michonne's obstinate refusal to assist had led to strained relations between Alexandria's safe zone and the other communities. This had created a rift between Maggie and Michonne as well. Later, the kingdom proposed a joint marketplace among the communities for exchanging resources, an initiative meant to foster development. Yet, Michonne remained reluctant to participate, unwilling to send her people out into potential danger. Occasionally, Aaron would secretly visit the Hilltop to check up on his old friends, keeping it from Michonne. The council also tried to persuade Michonne to change her mind about joining the marketplace, but it proved to be an arduous task. As they discussed these matters, a signal flare sounded in the distant sky. They identified it coming from the nearby woods and acted swiftly, recognizing that their own people were in trouble. Upon reaching the woods, they found Rosita unconscious by a tree. Aaron rushed to wake Rosita up. He knew that Rosita had gone out with Eugene. Now injured and unconscious, Rosita was here. Where was Eugene? In her weakened state, Rosita revealed that she had hidden Eugene in a nearby barn. Jesus urged them to return to the Hilltop first as zombies were approaching. With nightfall approaching, they decided to search for Eugene in the morning. Meanwhile, Carol and Daryl didn't continue towards the Hilltop. Instead, they followed Daryl to his camp. Over these years, Daryl hadn't found any clues about Rick. When Daryl was tired, he slept on a raft. And when hungry, he went hunting. On one such outing, he found a dog, naming it simply Dog. Carol then pulled Daryl aside and explained that she was sending Henry to the Hilltop to study. Afterward, she'd return to the kingdom to prepare for the marketplace. She expressed concern about Henry's idealism, stating that he wasn't suited for survival in the apocalypse. Carol hoped that Daryl would accompany her to the Hilltop to watch over Henry and teach him about the harsh reality of their world. Daryl outright refused, believing that Henry needed to experience hardship to learn, just like all of them had throughout their journey. Carol persisted, determined to convince Daryl to help. Michonne led the 5-person team to the location of their vehicle. To their surprise, the lorry was now overturned, its contents strewn about in disarray. They can only guess that they've encountered a larger zombie horde. Magna's eyes welled with sadness as she searched for her belongings. Her boyfriend had sacrificed himself here. A few minutes later, their weapons were found, but Michonne wouldn't allow them to carry them. She gravely informed them that she had come to verify what had happened to them. Siddiq and DJ will escort you the rest of the way. The team of 5 was very confused. She hadn't been to the Hilltop in ages. Who knew what the situation was like there? On top of that, she was confiscating their weapons. Michonne wasn't shy in retorting that if they wanted to go to the Hilltop for a better life, they needed to leave their weapons behind. Otherwise, she wouldn't accompany them. The people in the room looked at each other in disbelief and didn't know what to say. Facing Michonne's dominance and the unknown nature of the Hilltop, the team began to diverge in their opinions. Some suggested surviving on their own. However, Luke believed that they weren't bad people and they should go to the Hilltop. Yumiko concurred, reasoning that if these people wanted to harm them, they would have done so already. Luke also told his companions that while they might not like Michonne's rules, they had survived on the outside for a long time and knew what life was like out there. So, for the possibility of safety, they should endure, so the others don't say anything. The group found an open room to rest as the sun began to set. Michonne stayed outside on guard. Suddenly, she heard noises from inside, seemingly from the place where the weapons were stored. When Michonne walked in, she saw a figure searching for weapons. She knew these people were up to no good. Michonne quickly approached him and told him to drop his weapon and turn around.
I said, drop it.
I can't.
The ensuing scream woke up the sleeping group, prompting them to rush to the scene.
What the hell's going on?
It turned out to be a misunderstanding. Luke's prized violin had been cut in half. With it being close to dawn and no one feeling sleepy, Michonne's intentions to explain were halted by Luke, who heartbreakingly explained the value of the violin. This led to some teasing among the teammates. It seemed that this wasn't the first time Luke had shown off his violin. This accidental incident caused Michonne to let her guard down somewhat. In the early morning, they quickly gathered their belongings as they were just a few hours away from reaching the hilltop. Michonne began instructing Siddiq about various matters, intending to leave after escorting them a portion of the way to avoid any awkward encounters with Maggie. Siddiq assured Michonne that she needn't worry. Maggie had already left the hilltop with her son and Jesus was now the leader. Michonne looked shocked. It seems that the committee is secretly liaising with other communities, but Michonne was more worried about Maggie than anything else. How did she get out of the hilltop? Before Siddiq could answer, DJ comes back and says there are zombies out there and they have to leave now. The group quickly set off. Yumiko and the others wanted their weapons to fight off the zombies, but Michonne didn't respond to their request. Upon venturing outside, they saw that the number of zombies was overwhelming. They wouldn't be able to break through without weapons. DJ hurriedly opened a bag filled with weapons. They needed to fight their way out together, armed with weapons. Their combat abilities were all formidable. Yumiko was an exceptional archer, while Kelly and her brother displayed incredible skill with slingshots. Looking towards their horse-drawn carriage, they noticed that most of the zombies were attracted to the horses. The transportation was crucial and couldn't be damaged. Yumiko quickly directed her team, having them split up and fight in pairs. The weakest fighter among them was likely Luke, the music teacher. Fortunately, others came to his aid. In a matter of minutes, the zombies posed no significant threat. At this moment, a zombie in a floral shirt approached. Everyone froze. It was Magna's boyfriend, their former teammate. Michonne understood their hesitation, so she took care of it herself. More zombies were closing in, and the group remained in a state of mourning. Michonne urges them to leave as soon as possible. After last night's misunderstanding and the fight just now, Michonne has let her guard down against them. She didn't take back their weapons either, but the 5 individuals weren't in the best mood, considering they had witnessed their close companions turning into zombies. After walking for a while, Michonne stopped. It would only be embarrassing to go to the hilltop. She wouldn't be welcome there. Siddiq apologized and mentioned that he should have informed Michonne about Maggie earlier. Maggie was now in a distant place, helping Georgie manage a new community. Friendly reminder, Georgie is the person who gave them that book. Siddiq wanted to persuade Michonne to go to the hilltop, as the strained relationship could be repaired. However, Michonne declined. She was a strong-willed individual. Just as they talk, Michonne prepares to draw her katana as 2 men on horseback are seen in the distance. Judging by their spears, they were likely from the hilltop. These 2 men were going to deliver a message to the Alexandria safe zone, where Rosita was recovering from her wounds. Michonne changed her mind upon seeing them. Daryl and Carol had already reached the hilltop. Their arrival was naturally welcomed by the community. Tara also came forward to greet and embrace them. Over the past 5 years, the 2 communities had supported each other. Leading to this day, Jesus teased, "What wind blew you guys here?" Carol had to pull Henry out and explain that he wanted to learn blacksmithing here. Jesus naturally agreed. They were surprised by how much Henry had grown. Aaron also came forward to catch up with Daryl. Aaron told Daryl about Rosita's condition and how Eugene had gone missing. They were preparing to go find him. And Daryl, the tracking expert, could be of great help. Daryl readily agreed. Hearing about the mission, the spirited young Henry also wanted to join, but he was sternly rejected by his mother. Even Jesus put on armor, ready to leave. He didn't want to stay here and manage. Jesus is familiar with the terrain here and can go out and be useful. Soon, the search team set out, hoping Eugene was still alive. 3 individuals stood on the mountain, gazing strangely down below. They had never witnessed a horde of zombies circling in place before. It seemed that this was the group of zombies tracking Rosita. Daryl, experienced in wilderness survival, found these zombies to be oddly behaving, but he knew that finding Eugene was their top priority. The 3 of them can only go around the side of the zombie horde. Little did they know that as they left, one of the zombies lifted its head. 10 minutes later, they managed to skirt around the horde and were walking on the plains on the opposite side. Suddenly, Daryl halted, signaling the others to stay silent. He listens carefully and tells them that the zombie horde is coming their way. The others were puzzled, as they saw nothing. Daryl explains that it's the wind that carries the sound over, something he's learned from surviving in the wilderness. Immediately after, Daryl threw an alarm clock out and took a detour with the 2 of them from a farther location. 10 minutes later, the zombie horde reached the place where they had just been. Shockingly, in a brief period, the number of zombies had doubled. The zombies were now heading towards Daryl's alarm clock, which was the opposite direction of Daryl's tracking, so they didn't give it a second thought. Back at the hilltop,
Riders! Riders are coming! Riders are coming!
upon hearing the news, all the farmers rushed inside the walls, fearing a terrifying attack. Only it was Michonne and the others. The newcomers didn't know Michonne, so they thought she was a terrorist. Luke and the others in the car look out over the farmland. It looked like a very nice place, and their fears had been misplaced. Still, they felt it was important not to get too excited in case their hopes were dashed. Soon, they arrived outside the walls. Thinking they were uninvited guests, Tara and the others rushed out, brandishing their weapons. The woman, being a long-standing member of the kingdom, naturally knows Michonne, but none of them welcome this woman now. Michonne arrived at the gate with a horse-drawn carriage and waited. Magna kept her companions at the ready. Magna thought there must be someone on the wall with a bow and arrow pointed at them, ready to shoot them. As soon as she had finished speaking, the woman didn't say a word, just looked at Michonne. Michonne realized she was asking them to hand over their weapons. Michonne didn't resist. She threw her knife and gun on the ground. The others followed suit. Afterward, the gate opened, allowing them entry. The Hilltop's treatment of Michonne was that of the most familiar stranger. Tara, facing Michonne, didn't even muster a smile. Michonne then realizes that members of her community have been keeping a lot of things from her. Tara also exclaimed that it was a really special day, with old friends coming in. Tara went on to say that when they leave tomorrow, they can take their weapons with them. However, the decision regarding the other newcomers joining would be made upon Jesus' return. As the group dispersed, Michonne looked into the distance with a smile. Spotting an old friend, unexpectedly, Carol didn't respond and instead turned to walk back into the house. After a while, Siddiq approached Carol, exchanging greetings and a hug. Carol simply greeted Michonne. Even the new team of 5 were more enthusiastic than Michonne. After brief introductions on both sides, Siddiq led them to where they would stay, leaving an awkward situation behind. Unable to avoid it, the two women engaged in a conversation for a while, mainly discussing the children's growth. Michonne expressed that she had received Ezekiel's plea for help, but their community had many concerns, apologizing for not aiding them. Carol, not wanting to dwell on the matter any longer, once again suggested that Alexandria's safe zone join the upcoming marketplace. Before Carol could finish, Michonne vehemently refused, stating that she wouldn't send anyone to the kingdom. Since the incident with Joselyn, Michonne wanted to focus solely on her own community. Carol's disappointment was evident, seeing her former friend develop in this way. After a while, Carol prepared to leave, her eyes welling up with tears at the thought of being separated from her son. After saying her goodbyes, Carol left the hilltop where she was sure Henry would be properly trained. In the medical room, Rosita woke up, worried about Eugene's condition as she had been unconscious for a day. Michonne reassured Rosita that someone had gone to find Eugene. Rosita's expression turned to panic, and she insisted that they needed to find them. The region was now engulfed in heavy fog, severely limiting visibility. Drawing on his tracking experience, Daryl finally located the shed that Rosita had described. His dogs swiftly picked up Eugene's scent and led them to a pile of hay, where they discovered a hidden trapdoor. Jesus opened the door and saw that Eugene was in there, and he looked like he was in a terrible state. Without hesitation, they pulled him out. Eugene recounted his escape and his dislocated knee. Daryl tried to reset Eugene's joint here, but Eugene refused. Eugene urges them to get out of the area in a panicked tone, convinced that the zombie horde tracking them will be back. The three were baffled by his words. Zombies that could track? It sounded like a fairy tale. Seeing Eugene's distressed state, they decided to get him back first and discuss it later. Suddenly, a commotion outside indicated that the zombies had indeed returned. Strangely, the zombies seemed to be gradually surrounding the area. The three of them can only take Eugene and leave quickly from the side and return the way they came. 5 minutes later, they had exited the house. Aaron was in charge of the rear. Despite their fast pace, the horde of zombies continued to pursue relentlessly. Eugene, despite enduring pain, was brought to a three-way intersection. At this point, they realized that these were the same zombies they had encountered earlier. It was eerie. Could zombies truly possess intelligence and tactics? Eugene hypothesized that the zombies might be evolving. Daryl immediately refuted the idea as nonsense, and Jesus was also skeptical. However, Eugene argued that if the dead could rise and walk, what else was impossible? Maybe they're slowly gaining memories. Otherwise, Why would they have to destroy their brains to kill them? Neither of them had any reason to refute at that moment. Indeed, what could be more fantastical than the reanimation of the dead? At that moment, Aaron caught up and informed them that the zombies were already trailing behind them. They needed to reach the horse stash and leave quickly. Eugene understood he was a burden and suggested they leave him behind, but there was no way the trio would abandon him. After all, they had come to find him. Daryl decided to draw the zombies away down another path, allowing them to escape and rendezvous at the hilltop. Soon, the horde reached the crossroads. Daryl crouches on the roof of an abandoned caravan in the other direction. As long as he can attract the zombies to come this way, he lit a string of firecrackers and tossed them onto the road. The explosive noise naturally attracted the zombies' attention, with Daryl's dog barking fervently. But soon Daryl's expression freezes. The horde had only moved a few meters in his direction before abruptly shifting course. It was eerily strange. Could Eugene's hypothesis be true? Had the zombies truly gained intelligence? If that were the case, Jesus and Aaron were in danger. Daryl decided to detour and provide assistance. Meanwhile, Jesus and his group continued running, but the visibility was extremely poor due to the fog. Coupled with carrying Eugene, they couldn't maintain a fast pace. Peering into the dense mist, Jesus could vaguely discern the shapes of the zombies. It seemed the horde had caught up. They had no choice but to keep moving with Eugene. After a while, they discovered a gap in a wall. Planning to enter here and find another exit, they hoped this maneuver would lose the pursuing zombies. As they stepped inside, the zombies were right behind them. The manor was like a maze under the fog. Luckily, Jesus spotted a door and rushed to open it. He exerted all his strength, but the iron door was stuck in the mud and wouldn't budge. With no other option, they had to attempt to get Eugene down from the wall. The two of them struggled as they lifted Eugene, but he was simply too heavy. Weighing over 200 pounds, it seemed impossible to get him out. Meanwhile, the distant roars of the approaching zombies grew louder. Unable to leave Eugene behind, they stood ready with their weapons, preparing to confront the zombies. Fortunately, the breach in the wall limited the zombies' entry speed, and their numbers weren't too high at the moment. Aaron has been practicing with Jesus for more than 2 years. His skills are not the same as back then, and he can kill zombies with ease. Within minutes, they managed to clear the area, but their expressions remained grim as the sound of zombies echoed throughout the estate. Just as Eugene began to panic, a familiar voice called out to him. Michonne had arrived. Rosita told her about the horrible zombies, and Michonne found the place based on the description. Eugene was overjoyed to see Michonne and hurried to assist in opening the door. However, the door remained difficult to push open. 2 more people arrived to help. In fact, they are actually righteous people. Plus, it was the right time to show off, so they wouldn't let go of this opportunity. With their efforts, they managed to open a narrow gap in the door. Jesus instructed Aaron to help Eugene out first and stayed behind to hold off the zombies. Aaron didn't hesitate. Jesus exhibited incredible agility, easily dealing with the few zombies that approached him. 3 minutes later, the others had made it outside. Aaron shouted for Jesus to catch up. Upon hearing Aaron's call, Jesus moved towards the entrance.
Jesus! Come on!
Where you do not belong.
The crowd outside the door is furious. They don't care about the weird situation. They rush in to rescue Jesus. A few more zombies rush in with knives. Suddenly, Daryl caught up. The zombies coming in from behind are also fighting with Michonne and the others. However, it was a one-sided massacre. Their combat skills were weak, and in less than a minute, they were all eliminated. Aaron approached Jesus, his face filled with sorrow. As he gazed at his lifeless body, Daryl also found out that the back of the zombie's head had some stitching marks. Daryl used a knife to cut it open and then turned it around. It was a mask. These zombies were actually people in disguise. No wonder the zombie horde is tracking them. So there's a mix of these freaks in there. Suddenly, voices came from around them again, planning their intention to surround them. It seemed the masked individuals had accomplices. The zombies are showing up in the fog. These perverts are mixed in. It's impossible to tell these perverts apart just by looking at them. Daryl quickly noticed that almost all of the Skinners had knives in their hands. Due to the dense fog, discerning details was difficult. Their best option was to retreat with Jesus's body for now. Daryl secured the door bolt before they left. But after they left, Luke was up early the next morning. He couldn't remember how long it had been since he'd slept so well. Life here was truly blissful. Tara had a frown on her face. Jesus and the others had been out all day. Michonne and the others hadn't returned from their support. They are worried that something has happened. Tara decided to dispatch 4 individuals in 2 groups to scout for their traces. Now there's 1 more to go. At this point, Luke expressed his willingness to help, feeling the need to contribute. Luke's behavior also won everyone's favor. Alden and Luke formed one team for the mission. Enid stepped up to remind her boyfriend, Alden, to stay safe. Yes, Enid and Alden were now a couple, back with Michonne's group. They had temporarily escaped the zombies. However, they were puzzled by who these deranged people were, disguising themselves in such a grotesque manner. It's a bunch of crazies. They soon arrived at the horse stash and their next task was to return to the hilltop and inform everyone about the situation, and then they were on their way. The mood wasn't very good because of Jesus' death. Daryl looked behind at the strange Yumiko and Magna. Michonne explained that Judith had discovered them and vouched for their trustworthiness. Now, Michonne herself was vouching for them. Their actions in aiding the group the previous night had earned Michonne's complete trust. Michonne has decided that if the hilltop won't take them in, she'll take them back to the Alexandria safe zone. Daryl understood Michonne's initial reluctance to take in strangers, given his experience as a witness to the Joselyn incident, an incident that almost cost Michonne Judith and the baby in her womb. Michonne expressed her gratitude, acknowledging that everyone thought Rick was dead, but Daryl had been tirelessly searching for him for 5 years. He had also helped her during her pregnancy and in saving Judith. She was grateful for everything. As the group continues on, the dog barks furiously, heralding the appearance of the zombies. Are there any Skinners amongst them? Daryl decides to give it a try just to find out. Zombies staggered on a wooden bridge. Daryl approached the head of the bridge, raising his crossbow. To verify if someone was pretending to be a zombie, holding a crossbow at the bridgehead, he didn't aim at the zombie's head but shot an arrow through the zombie's thigh. The shot zombie's movement remained unaffected, indicating it was a real zombie, followed by a second one. Clearly, these deviants were mixed among them. Magna and Yumiko come out with their weapons. The 2 zombies behind them sensed the danger and immediately turned around. Apparently they were Skinners disguised as zombies. Michonne had already blocked their escape route. The skinwearer near Michonne also stopped his disguise and rushed up with his knife. Seeing all his companions slain, the last flayer fell to his knees. Daryl took a moment to observe but refrained from making a move because he had an intuition that there was a woman beneath the mask. Daryl pulled off the mask and saw that it was a 16 or 17-year-old child. She trembled in fear, pleading Daryl not to kill her. In truth, regardless of what the woman said, Michonne wouldn't believe her words. The girl was genuinely scared. She had witnessed the formidable combat skills of these people. At this time, another group of zombies came from the distance. Daryl decided to bring the woman back for questioning, hoping to extract information about the organization behind her. An hour later, they arrived back at the hilltop with the woman. The residents rushed out to greet them, having been gone for nearly 2 days. Only soon their looks froze, for the body of Jesus was carried on the back of a horse. No one could believe that Jesus, so skilled, had died. The leader who had always been gentle met such a sudden end, spreading grief throughout the hilltop. Daryl prepared to take the girl to the basement and lock her up, followed by the indignant residents. Most of them wanted a statement for Jesus. Inside the basement, Henry was also locked up, for his first night of drinking and trouble, and he was locked up for reflection. In this moment, he heard Daryl's voice. Then the woman was pressed into a chair, but no matter what Michonne asked, the woman insisted that they had killed all her companions and that they had no names. The reason they're in the zombie is because they think zombies are the dominant force in the world. Seeing that they couldn't get anything out of it no matter how hard they asked, they went out, but they didn't believe a word the woman said, so they had to find another time to ask. In the medical room, Eugene's dislocated knee received treatment, and Rosita stayed by his side. Rosita initially wanted to pour some water for Eugene, but he grabbed her hand. Eugene gazed at her affectionately and said, "When I was hiding in the barn, I was so afraid that you wouldn't make it through. I've been worried about you every minute, every second. I was scared that this time, I might not come back. I can't tell you in person that I like you. I'm tired of waiting. I genuinely want to be with you." Before Eugene could finish, Rosita pulled away and rushed towards the door. Once outside, Rosita began to vomit, and Siddiq followed her out to check on her. Eugene's heart sank instantly. Siddiq intended to advise Rosita to undergo a checkup, but what Rosita said next shocked everyone.
When we were having fun before Gabriel?
Yes, you heard it right. Before she got together with Gabriel, Rosita had a romantic involvement with Siddiq, and now she's pregnant with Siddiq's child. Eugene inside naturally overheard, along with the sound of his heart shattering. After a while, Michonne decided to take the group back to the Alexandria safe zone. They need to share the information about the peelers with everyone as soon as possible or they will be in danger out there. The loss of Jesus hit Aaron hard. Now he understood Michonne's decisions. The only way to be safe is to stay within the walls. He couldn't imagine what would happen to his daughter if he died. From then on, Aaron began to support Michonne. At twilight, the Hilltop residents gathered at the graveyard to bid Jesus their final farewell. Everyone's mood was heavy. Michonne and Daryl nodded their goodbyes. They were returning to Alexandria's safe zone. Daryl, lost in thought, recalled his first encounter with Jesus, and the moments through which he got to know the kingdom. All thanks to Jesus. All of this was the doings of the Whisperers. Daryl revisited the cell where the girl was held. She seemed panicked upon seeing him.
Do you want to die? Is that it? And they're ready to string you up right now. The people up there just buried a good man.
Daryl, what's your problem?
Quiet! All I gotta do is drag your ass up them steps. How many?
10! There were 10 of us!
The girl said that there were about 10 of them, wearing masks to blend in with the walker herds. They didn't have a settlement. Places like yours will eventually fall. Only their methods are the way of nature. The girl was scared this time. She hurriedly retorted, "Sooner or later, we'll kill you. Isn't that how this world is? It's either you die or we perish. Living people nowadays are a threat." Daryl's heart softened again. She was just a child after all. There was something familiar about the way the girl was looking at him. Wasn't it his childhood self living in an environment of domestic abuse? Daryl silently observed her for a moment before locking the door. Daryl warns Henry not to act like a fool and think that everything in the world is good, and to come out when he doesn't look like a fool. Henry took the admonishment without getting angry. He was just a bit puzzled about why they treated the young girl that way. At that moment, a thank you came from the next cell. It was the girl who thanked him for his help. Henry had a simple nature, seeing only the surface of things. He didn't think about the fact that these men had killed Jesus. He just knew that the girl was miserable. The two struck up a conversation in the cell. Daryl eavesdropped from outside, knowing that the information he had coerced might not be reliable. It might be possible to get some useful information that way. The evening had set in, and Enid stood on the wall, filled with worry. Jesus and the others had returned, but Alden and Luke were still out searching. Little did they know, the moment those two unlucky souls entered the woods, they saw a walker standing still. It was odd, but they decided to take it down. Yet, more walkers emerged around them, unnaturally fixated on them. What was going on? Why were the walkers behaving this way? When they turned their heads, the zombie came towards them.
Trail ends here.
This is the man with the baseball bat who enslaved the survivors of the area and at one point overwhelmed Rick's team. Thankfully, the combined efforts of all the communities eventually overcame the threat of the saviors.
We're done. It's over.
Though Negan had his throat slit by Rick, he survived. However, he became a prisoner, and if all went as planned, Negan would spend the rest of his life locked away. After a year in prison, Negan was so disillusioned that he couldn't stand the thought of spending his life in jail that he got down on his knees and begged Maggie to kill him. Negan was a far cry from his former dominant self. Ultimately, Maggie decided to let Negan live in agony, and so, 6 years flew by, during which many children grew up. Out of humanitarianism, a window was opened in Negan's cell to let in some fresh air. Every week, Gabriel would come to help Negan with his penance. The results were limited, but Negan cooperated. At least the monotonous prison life had a hint of change. Negan's mindset wasn't as desolate as it was a few years ago. Apart from watching the changes in Alexandria's safe zone through his window every day, what Negan looked forward to the most was someone's visit Judith. Whenever Judith was upset or had a piece of homework she couldn't do, she'd come out on the steps and say it out loud. Not only did Negan help Judith with her maths problems, but he also tried to cheer her up. Over time, the two of them got to know each other better. It had to be said that Rick's pair of children made Negan quite envious. Negan has fantasized many times that if she had a child, she'd have to be like Carl Judith, who's not only smart but also responsible. On this evening, Negan, as usual, was playing baseball to pass the time, but he accidentally threw the ball outside. Negan couldn't help but lament how damn unbearable these days were, with no visible hope for the future. However, Negan noticed that the cell door seemed a bit different tonight. It shook slightly when the wind blew. He guessed that maybe Gabriel had forgotten to lock it when he left during the day. Negan's speculation turned out to be correct. During the day, a messenger from the Hilltop had come and shared news of Rosita's injury. Gabriel, upon hearing the news, was deeply troubled and neglected to check the cell door lock. Negan stepped out. After a whole 7 years, he was finally getting out of this confinement. Subsequently, Negan stealthily left the house. When he reached the crossroads, he listened to the sounds outside while contemplating where to go next. Instead of fleeing immediately, he observed the current state of Alexandria's safe zone. The changes were indeed refreshing, making it hard to believe this was the same community from before. Negan then arrived at the garden and plucked a tomato to eat. With his stomach full, Negan grabbed a shovel and headed for Rick's house. Michonne was still at the Hilltop, and she wouldn't have expected Negan to escape. Negan entered a room. It was a child's room, but it was empty. There was a painting on the wall depicting Rick's family. This was most likely Judith's room. Michonne must have left the siblings in the care of someone else. Negan considered Judith as his own daughter. Since nobody was around, Negan decided to leave. He took a compass from the bedside table as a memento. He tossed the tool out before starting to climb, but then a childish voice interrupted Negan. The lovely Judith had arrived and was pointing a gun at him.
I'm not going back. You're not gonna shoot me, kid. So you just pull that trigger if that's what you're gonna do, little lady.
Yeah, I will.
How about this?
How about no?
You know, when your mom and dad, they told me I was gonna be good for something, that I would, when they locked me up, help people see that things could change. For everybody but me. And they did. Holy shit, did they ever. I mean, look around. Alexandria is a goddamn wonderland. But my part, it's just 4 walls and a bedpan.
Rules are rules. My mom decides, not me.
But you can. You're not letting me go. You know, it's just like when we have our little chats together. You're just not seeing me leave.
You know, there's nothing out there for you. For anyone.
You know me better than anyone's known me in a very long time. You know me. So, I promise you, I promise that I'm not going to hurt anyone. I promise you I won't hurt them. Even if they try to hurt me, that I'm not going to hurt anyone. I gotta go. Thank you.
Hey,
You want it back?
were you in my room?
Yeah.
Keep it. It'll help you find your way. But if I see you again, I'll shoot.
And so, Judith watched the old friend leave. Negan left the Alexandria safe zone with a shovel and some fruit. The first rays of morning sunlight illuminated Negan's face, giving him a taste of freedom once again. How wonderful. Next, Negan headed towards the direction of Salvation Hall, his only home. The prison's torments from the past years had long worn down Negan's spirit. Now he was simply going back to take a look, with no intentions of making a comeback. Moreover, Negan's body was not what it used to be. Killing a zombie left him catching his breath for a while. He was about to take a break when the zombie in the car suddenly grabbed Negan. Negan instinctively moved back, accidentally pulling the zombie down, and it fell onto his backpack. Although he managed to deal with the zombie in the end, Negan's cucumber and tomatoes he had been carrying were ruined and no longer edible. Embarking on the long journey ahead, hunger forced Negan to endure, and when thirsty, he drank water from the river. However, this water wasn't clean, and Negan soon experienced diarrhea. At that moment, Negan truly felt the hardships of survival in the present day. An hour later, Negan reached a small town. Passing by a men's clothing store, Negan went inside and smiled with satisfaction, because there were leather jackets here. It seemed that Negan had a special liking for them. Having donned the clothes, Negan walked for another 2 hours until he finally reached his destination. Gazing at this familiar place, Negan had once established his legacy here. With grand aspirations to save humanity, he wanted to shout, "I'm back, Negan!" Negan opened the main door and whistled as he entered. Inside, there were no people kneeling to welcome him, no group of followers surrounding him, only ruin and decay. Spiderwebs were everywhere. Though he was prepared for it, it still saddened him to witness it. After all, this place was his home, where his dreams had taken root. Negan then smashes through a wall, which hides a motorbike and a large amount of food. These were things he had left behind, but unfortunately, the food had been consumed by rats. With a sense of disappointment, Negan aimlessly wandered through every corner of Salvation Hall. He had once believed that people were the most crucial resource in the apocalypse, yet now only he remained, without supplies, without protective measures. Salvation Hall was no longer suitable for survival. In this moment, Negan suddenly lost his sense of purpose, not knowing what to do or where to go. Then Negan felt the compass in his pocket. Looking at Judith's name on it, he suddenly missed that little one. Thankfully, the motorcycle was still functional, sparing him from walking. Negan rode the bike towards Alexandria's safe zone. At that moment, a little girl appeared ahead of Negan on the road, holding a gun. Seeing the motorcycle, she fired directly at it. The shot hit the bike's wheel, causing Negan to crash and fall to the ground.
Alright, slow down, kid.
A whole lot of people are out looking for you.
I know you said you'd shoot, but you sure as shit did.
Language! I told you there was nothing out there.
Damn.
I'm a kid, asshole.
What can I say? I like to swear in front of my friends. Thanks for letting me borrow that.
You're going back to Alexandria?
Yep.
Why?
Because you were right.
So you go back. Then what?
I will let you know when I know.
That night, in the Hilltop's dungeon, Daryl eavesdropped outside the cell to learn about the Whisperer's origins. This tactic proved effective as the two young individuals quickly established rapport through their conversation. From their chat, Daryl gathered that the girl's name was Lydia. Her family had joined a survival group after the outbreak of the zombie virus. Her mother had been protective and kind, but over time, the ugliness of human nature had emerged. Lydia's mother started killing to protect her, gradually becoming twisted. As the two of them talked, the sun came up. The fool Henry started opening up to Lydia about the kingdom. Just as Henry was speaking, Daryl opened the cell door and dragged him out. Angrily reprimanding Henry, Daryl exclaimed, "What the hell is wrong with you? Sharing kingdom secrets with her? What if she's got accomplices? You want to get people there killed?" Only then did Henry realize this guy had been eavesdropping. Daryl didn't deny it, stating, "A few of us took turns listening, just to find out what that girl was saying to you. Despite using you, it's been effective." Henry provocatively retorted that Lydia was a good person, just twisted outside and he called Daryl a jerk, telling him to go find out for himself. He wouldn't let them use him anymore. With that, Henry stormed off angrily. Meanwhile, outside, Tara led a small team in search of Luke and Alden. Two men went out for reconnaissance, and suddenly, a motionless zombie appeared ahead. Luke and Alden feel a little strange, but still go forward to deal with it. However, numerous zombies appeared around them, all staring fixedly at them. When they turned their heads again,
Trail ends here.
the missing two didn't come back all night. Tara went out with her team to look for them. Connie suddenly noticed something in the distance. A group of zombies was feasting on something. Yumiko advised everyone not to rush in and to maintain a distance, observing their hands for hidden knives. There might be whisperers among them. As Yumiko finished speaking, everyone sprang into action. They attacked the zombies from a distance, not allowing them to get close. In less than a minute, all 7 or 8 zombies have been killed. They noticed the zombies were feasting on Alden and Luke's horses. Connie also made a discovery: these horses' wounds appeared to have been deliberately made with a knife to attract the zombies. It was likely the work of the Whisperers. Alden and Luke were probably in grave danger. Yumiko initially wanted everyone to split up and continue searching, but Tara stopped them. Tara insisted they return to the Hilltop immediately as it was no longer safe outside. Several people looked at Tara with confusion. Were they giving up on finding the missing men? Tara's expression turned serious as she explained that the girl had lied about there only being her mother among the Whisperers. There could be 3 of them or even 300, so they'll go back to the Hilltop and make a plan before they go out. The chief has spoken and the rest of us can't say anything else. Back at the Hilltop, Daryl returned to the cell again. This time, he wasn't hysterical or explosive. Ultimately, this girl was just a child. In a soft voice, he asked, "We're missing 2 people, but we found their horses, half skinned and half eaten by walkers. What would your mother do if she found them? Would she kill them?" Lydia pondered for a moment and replied, "If she had no choice, she'd probably have to." Subsequently, Lydia began to recount her experiences since the apocalypse began. From her narrative, they learned that Lydia's father had been eaten by zombies while trying to save her. Her mother had grown increasingly cold and her treatment of Lydia had become horrendous. Lydia had spent almost the entirety of the past 10 years in an abusive household. Hearing this, Daryl wasn't sure if Lydia was telling the truth, but he could empathize deeply. After all, Daryl had also grown up in an abusive environment. Then Daryl took out a bottle of medicine from his body and threw it in. Daryl had just noticed that Lydia had been touching her ear. It should be inflamed. Lydia didn't refuse and reached the medicine with her foot. Having learned about Lydia's experiences, Daryl's tone softened. He assured her, "You help us, and we'll accept you too." Lydia didn't respond directly. She only asked if Daryl could give her some water to drink. Daryl naturally agreed, turning to fetch water with a spoon. Just as Daryl extended the spoon to her, Lydia suddenly lunged, trying to grab the spoon as a weapon, but Daryl was prepared, catching her arm in a firm grip. He then gently rolled up Lydia's sleeve, revealing a series of scars covering her arm. Daryl released his grip on Lydia. It seemed that Lydia's accounts of her experiences were indeed true, and she had endured long-term abuse. With a heavy sigh, Daryl walked out of the cell. Later that night, Daryl returned with a branch in hand. As he walked, he began speaking. Sometimes parents find 1,000 reasons to hit their kids. Maybe they're drunk, or they're in a bad mood. They're all just assholes. Daryl's words were laden with emotion, as if he were reflecting on his own childhood. Daryl had thought that Lydia would empathize and help them locate their missing friends. However, Lydia's response surprised him. Her mother had brainwashed her extensively, convincing her that this world now belonged to the zombies. Lydia believed her mother's purpose for hitting her was to toughen her up, to make her resilient and able to walk with the dead. She dismissed places like the Hilltop as mere fantasies. Daryl was furious. The girl was so twisted, it was a waste of time to talk to her, and he walked out in a huff. Outside the cell, Henry was sitting and called out to Daryl. Henry is also outside eavesdropping like Daryl. He wants to ask Daryl what to do with this girl. Daryl said with anger that it was better to leave it to Tara. The girl was too twisted. Henry asked directly, "Did someone used to hit you, too?" Daryl turned to look at him. Henry continued, "Once I heard my dad ask my mom why she used to wear her hair so short. His mother revealed that her first husband used to hit her. If she tried to escape, he would grab her hair and slam her against the wall. That was why she cut her hair short. Just like you, you're always behaving as if you're a violent maniac." He believed that Daryl was just protecting himself, not actually a violent person. Henry thinks Lydia is like Daryl in that Lydia's associates are bad, but she's not necessarily bad. She was just lonely and scared. He proposed that they could help her understand that the Hilltop was safe and that there was nothing to fear. Those words touched Daryl, too. Some shadows can last a lifetime. Daryl couldn't help but pity Lydia once again. Henry has a point, so let him try to calm Lydia down. As they conversed, 4 figures sneaked along the perimeter of the compound. It was Yumiko and her group. They didn't have any malicious intentions. They just wanted to go outside to search for Luke, so they're going to sneak out through the tunnels. After a while, the group arrived at the forest where the horses were found during the day. They hoped to follow the tracks to find clues about their missing friends. However, the footprints on the ground were too chaotic and difficult to decipher. They gathered to discuss their next move, but suddenly a zombie lunged at them. Though it didn't harm them, the forest's darkness echoed with the sounds of zombie groans. Shadowy figures moved toward them. Realizing the forest wasn't safe, they understood the risks of nighttime action, and it might be futile as well. Yumiko suggested returning to the Hilltop and searching during the day. They retraced their steps back, unaware that a few zombies were still lurking in the woods, eavesdropping on them. Meanwhile, Henry secretly made his way to the cell. It's the first time the two kids have seen each other's faces, but they both recognized each other's voices. Henry had always believed that Lydia was a good person. He covertly obtained a key and unlocked the cell door. Henry wanted to show Lydia around and demonstrate that good people lived here. Holding Lydia's hand, they strolled through the yard. Suddenly, a distant figure appeared. It seemed to be one of the patrolling members. They panicked, stepped on a brick and fell to the ground. Luckily, the people over there didn't notice them. At this moment, Lydia spotted something in the grass, looking like a treasure to her. Lydia dug out a worm from the soil and held it in her palm, removing the excess dirt. Curious, Henry followed her gaze. She then placed the worm in her mouth and began chewing. Henry was dumbstruck. Lydia then handed another worm to Henry. Henry hesitated, not reaching out to take it. Lydia thought Henry was thinking there was too much dirt and proceeded to clean up the bugs for him. Seeing Henry's hesitance, Lydia was puzzled. She wondered why he wasn't taking the delicacy she offered. Reluctantly, Henry took it from her and put the worm in his mouth. Attempting to chew it, he struggled to suppress the urge to vomit during the process.
I just ate a worm.
After finishing the worm, Henry continued walking with Lydia. explaining the layout of the hilltop and introducing the people living there. Lydia also cooperated with the conversation. Lydia's hand stealthily reached for the hammer on the table, preparing to use it to attack Henry and escape. Lydia looks around nervously and asks questions to distract herself, and Lydia's hand is completely gripping the hammer, despite what Henry says about how great this place is. According to her mom, it shouldn't exist. Just as Lydia was preparing to make her move, the sound of a crying child reached their ears. In the distance, a mother was soothing her baby to sleep. In that moment, Lydia thought about the pre-apocalyptic world, how her mother had cared for her so attentively, fearing for her safety. But slowly, her mother had changed. She shaved her head, and everything began to shift. She not only forced Lydia to wear a mask but also subjected her to frequent beatings. Henry sensed that something was off with Lydia and quickly called out to her. Lydia snapped back to reality but didn't say anything. She simply asked Henry to take her back to the cell. Unbeknownst to them, Daryl had been observing from the shadows all along. Even if Lydia had tried to harm Henry, he wouldn't have been hurt. Once they arrived in the cell, Lydia's mood remained subdued. Henry thought it was his fault and apologized before preparing to leave. At that moment, Lydia stopped Henry. Perhaps not everyone would understand Lydia's emotional shifts, but a child who had endured domestic abuse carried an internal scar. Right now, Lydia desperately needed someone to be with her, to prevent her from reliving the lonely, fearful nights. Henry had been the first person to treat Lydia kindly in a long time. He had shown her unconditional trust, which had touched her deeply. The boy had found his way into Lydia's heart. The next morning, Daryl arrived with breakfast early. A hint of shyness appeared on Henry's face, and he explained that he had been there to keep Lydia company. Daryl didn't expose them. Lydia got over it, and last night was the best night's sleep she'd ever had. She didn't have to worry about getting beaten up. She also understood that the people here were genuinely good. The twisted person was her mother. So, Lydia decided to tell Daryl everything she knew. Daryl remained silent throughout, offering her a spoon filled with water. This time, Daryl was not guarded. Perhaps only someone who had shared a similar fate could truly empathize. Lydia began to speak. Our group is called the Whisperers. My mother is the leader, and everyone refers to her as Alpha. She won't come looking for me. The entire group won't. If someone is captured or dies, they just move forward, as if those individuals never existed. Unless absolutely necessary, they usually don't antagonize larger survivor groups. Lydia continued. I was brought here initially to gather information, to feed them details when I escape. Otherwise, they have no reason to accept me again. Curiously, Henry asked, are you really her daughter? How could she just abandon you like this? Lydia didn't respond, her eyes betraying a sense of desolation. Daryl then asked, what happens to our people if they're captured by them? Lydia answered with sadness, if my mother finds them, I can't imagine any reason they'd survive. I'm sorry, if you want to find them, there's a makeshift camp near the bridge, but we don't stay in one place for too long. We move with the zombies. After conveying this, Lydia began describing her mother's personality and character. For a good 10 minutes, Lydia recounted her mother's cruelty and ruthlessness. As they listened, both Daryl and Henry were left with a heavy feeling. Daryl also spoke to comfort Lydia, and then he left. He was preparing to visit the Whisperers' camp. As he left the cell, Henry followed and asked a question. In his heart, Daryl had already decided to keep Lydia here. Outside, the four-person team had just returned beyond the fence. Yumiko looked up and saw Tara. They exchanged a glance, and Yumiko felt somewhat guilty, preparing to apologize to Tara. After all, they had left without a word. Upon reaching the enclosure, before Yumiko could speak, Tara was the first to ask if they had found anything. Yumiko could only offer an awkward smile and then apologized for their actions. In truth, the guards had already noticed their departure the previous night. Tara understood their concern for their teammates' well-being, but as the leader, she hoped that Yumiko would at least inform her when going against her decisions in the future. Tara simply didn't want to see more deaths. Yumiko was about to respond when a disturbance caught their attention from a distance. Yumiko picked up binoculars to get a closer look. A group of walkers was approaching from afar, but upon closer inspection, they realized these were actually the Whisperers. Connie, who was walking behind, senses something is wrong and sees it through the cornfield. The guards outside hurriedly pulled Kelly back inside the gate, but Kelly was concerned for her sister who was still outside. Meanwhile, Connie took cover in the cornfield. Tara is also in a bit of a panic. After all, she was new to being a leader. Tara hurriedly called out to Daryl in the yard. 2 minutes later, the Whisperers had reached the fence. The leader of the group was a bald woman. The men on the walls watched patiently, wondering what they were going to do.
Ah!
I'm Alpha, and we only want one thing from you, my daughter.
The woman looks nervously into the distance as a group of zombies dressed as zombies walk towards the hilltop. These were none other than the Whisperers, the group known for wearing the skins of the dead. Leading them was a bald woman. The strange behavior of the group, combined with their makeup, gave them a sense of invisible oppression.
I'm Alpha, and we only want one thing from you, my daughter.
They all understood that the daughter Alpha had mentioned was none other than Lydia. Daryl has decided to keep Lydia since he learned that she's a victim of domestic violence. So Daryl directly told Alpha, "You'd better hurry up and leave. You won't be given the person."
Wrong answer.
With a wave of Alpha's hand, another group of the Whisperers came from the distance. Those on the wall were somewhat taken aback, realizing that the Whisperers' numbers were substantial. Their intentions were clearly threatening. Alpha remained silent, waiting for a response. After all they've been through, they don't want to get into trouble, but they're also not the kind of people who back down when things go wrong, especially Daryl. He wasn't going to send Lydia back into the fire again. Alpha spoke out again with authority.
Your people crossed into our lands. There will be no conflict. Your people killed our people. There will be no conflict. I'm done talking. Bring me my daughter, or there will be conflict.
No one touches a girl.
Daryl ordered the gate to be opened and stepped out alone. This woman was undeniably arrogant.
You can't have her. Now, if it's a fight you're looking for, we got enough firepower to light you up. Right here and now.
Alpha felt a hint of annoyance but managed to contain it for the moment. To Daryl's surprise, he saw a baby. He inquired, curious, "You're bringing a baby out here?" Alpha sneered, then explained, "We are animals. Animals live outside. What's wrong with bringing a child?" Then, her tone changed.
Now, what were you saying? Lighting us all up? You seem to want conflict. I don't. So I'm proposing a trade.
The masks were removed to reveal the missing Luke and Alden. Alpha talks soft in the toughest way possible.
I wanted to kill them, but I want my daughter more. One of mine, two of yours. It's a good trade, which is why you're gonna take it.
Now, there was no choice but to return Lydia to Alpha. They can't ignore that Luke and Alden are alive or dead. Yumiko and the others had initially planned to bring Lydia out, but upon reaching the cell, they found Lydia missing. The door was open and the key was on it. It didn't take much to deduce that Henry was responsible for this. Daryl quickly instructed everyone to split up and search. Luke and Alden's safety depended on it. 5 minutes later, they had scoured almost every corner of the hilltop, but Lydia was nowhere to be found. Daryl began to suspect that she had managed to escape. Then one of the kids came over and said that Henry might have gone to the cabin where they always went. Enid suggested that Daryl stay behind to manage things while she went to find Henry. Daryl agreed without saying much. Because Enid and Henry had a small generation gap, it would be more effective to persuade him. On the outside, one of Alpha's henchmen reported that zombies were approaching from behind. They wondered whether they should lead them away. Alpha shook her head, signaling her henchmen to ensure the safety of the hostages. For the time being, let the zombies stay behind. If there is a conflict, the zombies will be a help. Luke and Alden, who were tied up, also noticed the approaching zombies. As Luke turned his head to look, he surprisingly spotted Connie hiding in the cornfield. Although he was puzzled about how Connie ended up there, Luke avoided looking further to protect her location. Using sign language, Luke communicated that the zombies were coming and she should hide quickly. 2 minutes later, the zombies are approaching, but they're being led by the Whisperers to hover in the same place. But the child was so scared that he cried very loudly and the zombie was uncontrollably moving towards the child's place. Despite the mother's attempts to soothe the child, Her efforts were in vain, and her anxiety was evident. The rules of the Whisperers were not to be taken lightly. Sure enough, Alpha was already watching her and gave her a wink. The woman had no choice but to remove the scarf from around her neck and lay the child on the ground. In this case, the child will be given to the zombies to eat. Alden was visibly angered by this sight. He couldn't believe these absurd rules. To abandon a child like this, people on the wall began banging on metal sheets, trying to attract the zombies with noise. However, the effect was minimal, and the zombies continued to move towards the child's location. Luke hurriedly communicated with Connie using sign language. He informed her that a baby was crying in the field in that direction. Upon receiving the message, Connie looked over in urgency. Sure enough, a horde of zombies was closing in on the crying baby. Connie, being a kind-hearted woman, didn't hesitate. She quickly took down a zombie with her slingshot and then ran towards the baby. As she picked up the baby, two of the Whisperers approached with knives. Connie had no choice but to turn and run towards the cornfield. Being deaf and relying on visual cues, Connie sometimes only noticed zombies when they were right in front of her. Perhaps due to the baby's cries, more and more zombies were drawn towards them. Just when Connie was struggling to fend them off, Daryl arrived, along with Earl and his wife. They emerged from a side door as soon as they saw the situation. Outside, in the small house, Henry hides here with Lydia. Lydia, who had just changed into new clothes, looked refreshed, but soon there was a voice calling out for him. Henry looked over and walked out. It was Enid who had come looking for Henry. Henry knew why they were there, and he pleaded, "Please, just leave. Say we're not here, please." Lydia would be beaten again if she went back. Enid sighed and said, "If there's anything we can do to help her, we will. But if she doesn't go back, they'll kill Luke and Alden. No one wants that." Enid understood that Henry had an overflowing sense of justice, so she told him that while many things in the world have right and wrong, sometimes we can't choose. We can only silently endure, especially in this lawless world. Henry was at a loss for words. In that moment, he realized that sticking to doing what was right wasn't so simple. Just when Henry was struggling, Lydia walked out. Lydia said, "It's okay, Henry, I'll leave. I want to leave this place too. I miss my mom." "Of course, I'll miss you too." Lydia said this to spare Henry. Before parting, she kissed the boy. 10 minutes later, Daryl walked out of the gate with Lydia. He actually wanted to keep the girl, having had an unfortunate childhood himself. He understood what kind of life Lydia would have if she went back, but sometimes there was no choice but to silently endure. Alpha looked at his daughter, who was clean and unharmed, and nodded without expression. Alpha kept her promise and released Luke and Alden. Daryl didn't waste time and let Lydia go directly. Lydia spent 2 days at the Hilltop. She fantasized that her mother might comfort and embrace her. However, her mother's subsequent actions brought her back to reality.
Sorry, Mama. Thanks for coming to get me. You call me Alpha. I call the rest. Yes, Alpha.
And so, the Whisperers departed. As if it were just a small episode in life, the two sides would never cross paths again. Life at the Hilltop returned to its calmness. In the evening, the reunited group of 5 sat together, drinking and chatting, their happiest moments. Only Connie sat lost in thought, her mind elsewhere. Enid and Alden were finally reunited. Earl and his wife held the baby they had saved today, cherishing it dearly, having lost their own son. This child seemed like a gift from above, giving them a reason to move forward. Henry lay on his bed, feeling down. He pondered why, in a world with clear right and wrong, it was sometimes impossible to do the right thing. Half an hour later, Daryl was also in a corner with no one around, perhaps reminiscing about his miserable childhood or thinking about Lydia. At this moment, a girl arrived. She had found a note in Henry's room. Daryl took it and read it, and Henry sneaked out. Naturally, Henry had gone to find Lydia. Daryl was getting ready to track them down. On one hand, he needed to ensure Henry's safety, a promise he had made to Carol. On the other hand, he wanted to rescue Lydia. After saying goodbye to Tara, Daryl headed towards the door. Seeing this, Connie seemed to realize something and hurriedly caught up. Connie hesitated for a moment, then realized that Daryl hadn't refused. Satisfied, she followed along. One couldn't help but be struck by Daryl's charisma. Isn't this love just coming along? You could say the two of them were quite a match. One silent and dependable, the other kind-hearted and courageous. In order to survive longer in the apocalypse, this group of humans disguises themselves as zombies and roams different areas. They are the Whisperers, the group that left the Hilltop. They are named the Whisperers because they must whisper when they speak. At this moment, Alpha is questioning her daughter Lydia about the situation at the Hilltop. Lydia naturally dares not defy Alpha, but, due to Henry's influence, she only speaks about trivial matters and claims she has been kept in confinement without access to any information. Alpha is very angry about this. She violated her own rules to save Lydia, yet now she has obtained no useful information. Faced with her mother's questioning, Lydia trembles, fearing another slap might come her way. However, Lydia timidly asks a question. Did you rescue me just to gather information? Isn't there even a tiny bit of mother-daughter concern?
Is it the only reason you came to get me? To get information?
What a stupid question.
Sorry, Alpha.
As expected, Alpha responds with harsh words, questioning the stupidity of Lydia's inquiry. Lydia's expression becomes crestfallen, realizing that her place in her mother's heart is worth less than a piece of information. Alpha no longer pays attention to Lydia and continues walking forward. An hour later, the Whisperers arrive at a mountain gorge to rest. This organization practices the law of the jungle, where survival comes first and everything else can be sacrificed, including one's children. Not far behind them, Henry hides in the ditch, having followed them all the way. However, Henry is eventually spotted, and although he manages to take down the first pursuer swiftly, he is confronted by a burly man, Beta, the strongest member of the Whisperers. Henry was lifted up like a chicken and slammed to the ground by Beta. Alpha learns that someone has been tracking them and is curious about this young man. Henry initially tries to remain silent with dignity, but Beta grips his arm and threatens to tear him apart and feed him to the zombies if he doesn't talk. Lydia watches from behind, refraining from interfering as it might harm Henry further. Henry endures and eventually agrees to speak up. Beta releases his grip, and Henry tells Alpha that he is from the Hilltop but wasn't sent by them.
I came for her. I'm from Hilltop.
You're so stupid.
After a moment of consideration, Alpha spares Henry's life and orders Beta to take him along. Then Alpha said to the clan,
Where there's one, there's more. Eyes open.
The Whisperers continued their journey, heading back to their nearby makeshift camp. On the way, the Alpha asks his daughter why she didn't tell her about Henry, the kid who risked his life to get to you. Lydia feigned composure and replied, I acted helpless, and this guy was foolish enough to believe it. He seems even dumber than I thought. Alpha, without suspicion, retorted with a mocking tone, Don't underestimate your charm. You're not just a master of deception. He was probably drawn in by your beauty. Alpha added, and Lydia didn't dare to argue, just quietly listening. After another half hour, they finally arrived at the camp. Henry was surprised by what he saw. The Whisperers were so numerous. There must be at least hundreds of them. After a while, Henry was tied to a tree. Henry was very curious to see Beta cutting the skin from the zombie's head. It gave him goosebumps. Approaching Henry, Alpha whispered, Civilization is dead. In this world, only the strong survive. The weak don't deserve to live. We must follow the laws of this new world. As Alpha spoke, a voice interrupted her.
You letting the weak die.
A man expressed discontent with Alpha's actions. One of the Whisperers' rules was never to look back for those they lost. However, Alpha, as the leader, had broken this rule by trading two people to save one. The man saw this as an opportunity to challenge Alpha, aiming to become the new Alpha of the group.
You the man to replace me? You think? To become the new Alpha, you have the right.
You're changing the rules again.
Challenge my leadership at any time. And I have the right to defend it. I know it's you. Challenge isn't his, it's yours.
What? No, we weren't.
saw you in the woods. What are you doing? Plotting with your boyfriend.
Oh, yes, you would.
The plan was uncovered, and the woman no longer concealed her intentions. She openly accused Alpha of leading them into danger and now left the boy at the camp. Those people won't let it go. She questions why Alpha doesn't get back at the Hilltop organization, who killed so many of their people, accusing Alpha of betraying not only her, but the whole organization.
If I failed you, they all follow me by choice. Because I make them strong. Because I keep them alive. Me.
I don't want to fight you.
Too late.
The woman's head was taken by the Alpha in brutal fashion. Henry watched in shock as his perception of the world was upended. Alpha held up the severed head, displaying her authority to the gathered whisperers. Ultimately, Alpha handed the woman's head to the man, trembling and silenced by fear. The man was unable to utter a word. Soon, both bodies were packaged and dragged away, taken to the plains above for feeding the zombies, the most suitable disposal method. This scene was also witnessed by Daryl and Connie, who had been tracking them. They realized the Whisperers team was likely nearby. Henry was still dozing off at night. Suddenly, Beta roughly cut the ropes binding him and dragged him away. They reached an open area, where Alpha tossed a knife to the ground, commanding her daughter to pick it up. Lydia's mind raced with ominous thoughts, but she dared not defy her mother, reluctantly bending down to retrieve the knife.
Kill the boy.
Alpha had noticed a change in Lydia since she returned during the day, sensing that she had forgotten the Whisperer's code of conduct. That's why Alpha left Henry behind, so that Lydia could rediscover what she was like in the beginning. Henry's face displayed a mixture of fear and helplessness, while Lydia was torn, tears welling up in her eyes.
Please. Don't be weak. Like your father. You know what happened to him.
Yeah, I know what happened to him, Mother.
Kill him. Or he'll kill you both. You decide.
Just then the Guardian, as they called it, swept through the camp. There were screams. Beta had no choice but to leave Henry and attend to the unfolding situation. The Whisperer's first response to the zombie attack was to don masks and blend into the horde. It was a twisted group of individuals. However, some of them were too slow and became zombie prey.
Keep your head down. We're leaving. Now.
Come on.
The attackers were Daryl and Connie. They took care of the sentries, and then they brought the zombies in. Seizing the opportunity, Daryl and Connie removed their disgusting disguises and began to escape with their 2 children. They didn't stop for a second. They had to get out before the Whisperers could react. During their escape, Henry tripped over a tree branch. The 3 of them stopped to check it out. Luckily, he wasn't hurt. Henry then realized that the path they were on wasn't leading back to the hilltop. Daryl explained that Tara had struck a deal with the Whisperers, which they had disrupted. They couldn't risk bringing trouble back. Lydia concurred. The Whisperers are too numerous and would absolutely destroy the hilltop for her. Henry suggested that he and Lydia leave on their own to avoid implicating anyone else. He believed he could handle the situation himself. Actually, Daryl is just tough on the outside and soft on the inside. He also couldn't bear it internally, so that's why he came out to look for it. Though Connie didn't understand their conversation, she urged them to stop arguing and leave. And here's the funny part. Daryl wanted to head north, while Connie aimed for the east. An argument ensued. Yet Henry and Lydia simply followed Connie, and even the dog tagged along. Reluctantly, Daryl adjusted their direction and continued onward. Within the Whisperers' camp, the zombies had been lured away. Some of the tribe members had been bitten. Much to Beta's anger, he resolved to personally pursue and eliminate the threat. In the preceding episodes, It was mentioned that the kingdom had faced difficulties in its survival over the years. They had previously sought assistance from other communities. Later, Ezekiel proposed the idea of establishing a market to facilitate the exchange of essential resources. The first market was scheduled to take place in 2 days' time. On the other side, at Alexandria's safe zone, Michonne returned from the Hilltop and promptly convened a committee meeting. She was furious that some of the committee members had done things without her knowledge. Particularly, she was upset with Gabriel for allowing Eugene and Rosita to venture out to install an amplifier, which ultimately led to Jesus' death. Negan also seized the opportunity to escape during this incident. Gabriel countered, "In the beginning, you were appointed sheriff to keep the community safe, so you were given veto power. However," he argued, "now she seemed to oppose every decision they made, be it going outside, interacting with strangers, or assisting the kingdom." He questioned the purpose of committee voting, asking who would help them when they faced trouble. Sid sided with Gabriel, also voicing his support. He recounted their encounter with Carol at the Hilltop, revealing that the kingdom's situation was even worse than what was mentioned in the letter. This was the reason for their desperate plea for help. With 2 days until the market, he suggested they could reevaluate their decision to participate. But, not surprisingly, Michonne was again against it, and her reasoning was simple. The kingdom can come to the door and ask for help, but they can't go out to the fair. Plus, there were the Whisperers out there, which meant danger. Consequently, the committee meeting ended with Michonne's decisive veto. Back at home, Gabriel seethed with frustration, feeling his role as committee head was virtually meaningless. He saw Michonne as overly autocratic and stubborn. In the midst of Gabriel's discontent, Rosita, his girlfriend, entered the living room. Rosita came here to say goodbye to Gabriel, because Rosita is pregnant and the baby is still Siddiq's. She didn't want to make things difficult for Gabriel, so she chose to move out on her own accord. Gabriel didn't attempt to dissuade her. He was at a loss for what to do next. Of course, there is another participant in the relationship, Eugene. He doesn't mind that Rosita is carrying another man's child. However, unfortunately for Eugene, Rosita's affection lies with Gabriel. So, Eugene sought out Gabriel, encouraging him not to give up just because of the child. He reminded Gabriel that it's rare to find such a wonderful girl. Following his words, Eugene handed Gabriel a bundle he had brought with him, a handmade loose-fitting maternity outfit. Although Rosita had no feelings for Eugene, he wanted the woman he loved to be happy. He hoped that Gabriel would use the outfit as a gift to win Rosita back. Gabriel contemplated Eugene's words for a while, eventually coming to the realization that Eugene was right. With that, Eugene turned and left. He shouldn't miss out on such a great girl just because of a child that wasn't his. So, he headed to Rosita's door. Meanwhile, Siddiq was sitting by the door. This part of the Walking Dead series might seem melodramatic, but from the storyline, it can be deduced that Rosita and Siddiq didn't have a strong emotional connection. Maybe they were just looking for excitement together and accidentally had a baby. In the back, Rosita and Gabriel love each other. Even more melodramatic, Gabriel and Siddiq don't hold any grudges against each other. They remain good brothers in arms. Gabriel decided to talk to them about winning back his lover. Eugene watched from a distance as Gabriel approached Rosita's door, a smile on his face. But slowly, Eugene's eyes are filled with a little bit of reluctance and sadness. On the other hand, Michonne came to the dungeon to ask Negan how he ran away. She wanted to know why he returned after escaping and what his intentions were. Negan slowly rose and stood by the cell door, saying, "I did escape before. I could have hidden in your house and killed you when you returned. Even taken out a lot of folks in the community, but I didn't." Before Negan could finish, Michonne interjected, "Because you know if you laid a hand on me, you'd be dead." She continued, "As for why you came back after escaping, I think it's because you realized you can't handle the world out there. So, you slinked back here." Negan didn't bother to argue. He admitted that the world had indeed changed a lot since he last left. But he had changed too. Since Michonne wouldn't kill him, could she get him to do something meaningful? Could she try to believe him? However, Negan's intentions are met with sarcasm by Michonne. To Michonne, it's crocodile tears. She didn't believe Negan and planned to reinforce the cell and seal the window even further. An hour later, Judith returned home. Michonne immediately inquired why she had followed her. Judith said, "I didn't follow you. I went to see Negan." Michonne's brow immediately furrowed. It was hard to believe that this little ancestor and Negan had crossed paths. This was unacceptable to her.
I feel sorry for him.
He is not your friend, sweetheart. So if he's not your friend, then why are you talking to him?
Obviously. He listens to me. Not everybody does.
I don't want you to ever go near him again.
Why not?
He is a monster.
No, he's not.
There's a reason that he's in a cage, Judith.
He's a human being.
But he has done monstrous things. He's killed people. People I cared about. People your dad cared about. And if we ever let him out, it would start all over again.
But Mom, he did get out. He's not like that
But people don't really change. I get why you want to believe that.
You did.
Go to your room.
Why?
I need a minute.
This single sentence set Michonne into contemplation. She had indeed changed, no longer the child's best friend but rather a perceived dictator in the eyes of others. After thinking things through at home, Michonne sought out Aaron. She asked him to convey to the committee that she wouldn't oppose voting to participate in the kingdom's market. Although she believed going out so far was dangerous, everyone had their own opinions and should be allowed to weigh the risks and make choices. That's the right of every resident. With Michonne no longer in opposition, the committee immediately began loading supplies into vehicles, preparing to embark on the journey to the market. Many viewers might wonder why they were participating in the market. It's essentially the principle of alleviating poverty. Alexandria's safe zone was self-sufficient, but the kingdom might not make it without help from other communities. This was in line with the vision of the United Society established by Rick. Over in the kingdom, preparations were also in full swing. Not only did they decorate the community beautifully, but Ezekiel also sent a team to clear the road of zombies, ensuring the safety of the incoming caravan. It all seems to be going well, and Carol is smiling happily. The fair would be a great addition to the new civilization. However, at this moment, Carol noticed the return of Jerry and others who had been cleaning up zombies outside. She was surprised by their early return. Carol saw that Jerry had a wound on his forehead, and the others seemed visibly shaken. They stated their intention to speak with the king. Carol could tell that something had gone wrong. They gathered in the hall and recounted their encounter outside. Originally, they were going about their usual business of clearing out zombies when they were unexpectedly attacked by a team. Thankfully, they weren't killed, but their weapons were taken, leaving behind a note that read, "We are the highwaymen." The note went on to declare that the roads around the kingdom belonged to them, and anyone coming to the market had to pay a toll. The note included a list of items and a designated trading location. Now, things were complicated. How could the kingdom, which had organized the fair because of a lack of food, possibly curry favor with the highwaymen? Jerry suggested that they eliminate these individuals, as their presence posed a threat to the communities attending the market. They needed to ensure the safety of their allies. Ezekiel thought it made sense and was ready to gather his men to do it. An hour later, they quietly approached the outskirts of the designated trading location. Observing the heavily armed highwaymen, Ezekiel realized that an all-out confrontation would result in heavy casualties on both sides. If they don't, no one will ever come to the fair again. Just when Ezekiel didn't know what to do, Carol came up with an idea. She believed that violence might not be the only solution. After all, the highwaymen didn't kill anyone before, they just wanted the supplies. Soon after, Ezekiel, Carol, and Jerry arrived at the designated trading location. Seeing that they hadn't brought anything with them, the leader of the highwaymen grew displeased. He ordered his followers to raise their weapons, ready for action at any moment. Ezekiel, however, stood his ground. He expressed that they wouldn't yield to their extortion, just when the highwaymen thought they had the upper hand. The ambush team from the kingdom charged in. They held knives to the throats of the highwaymen and archers took aim from higher ground. Ezekiel also took out his long knife. "As if you were going to make trouble, I would have to kill you." Then the men calmed down. Carol seized the opportunity to suggest that they work for them instead. Their mission is to secure the roads to the kingdom, not to rob it. In return, they would be allowed to participate in the market and exchange goods, as well as receive food and water from the kingdom. Ultimately, the highwaymen agreed, and the potential conflict was resolved peacefully. the survivors team armed with weapons continued forward on the road as they encountered zombies. These members of Hilltop Township, they're on their way to the market. After living in the post-apocalyptic world for so long, everyone has mastered combat skills and is able to destroy zombies with ease. Even the gentle girl with glasses can kill the zombies without any hesitation. Earl had just let his horse go when some zombies came towards him. As soon as Earl kills one, he trips over another. He managed to take down one, but another zombie knocked him to the ground. Tammy, on the horse-drawn cart, panicked. She quickly placed her child into a box, covered it, and prepared to rescue Earl. They could have stayed at the hilltop, but they were getting older and they intended to go to the market to find better guardians for their young children. Pressured by the weight of zombies, Earl struggled to hold on. When he looked up, he noticed a group of people rushing towards him with weapons in hand. These people seemed aggressive and unfamiliar. Tara's group noticed this too and swiftly got into a defensive stance. In the post-apocalyptic world, some humans could be more ruthless than zombies. The newcomers, riding horses and armed, showed no signs of stopping. They were ready for action. That's right, they are the highwaymen. They had already agreed to work for the kingdom, ensuring the safety of the road. An hour later, under the highwaymen's protection, the hilltop arrived at the kingdom. The sight of the bustling market attracted the young people who had come along. They were always drawn to fresh experiences. Carol and Ezekiel personally stepped forward to welcome them. Tara, who hadn't seen them in a while, hugged them. After a brief exchange, Carol turned her gaze towards the entrance but didn't spot Henry. She asked where the kid was. Tara told them to take it easy. Henry was with Daryl and they had agreed to meet at the market. Speaking of Daryl's group, after getting Henry out, they continued moving in the direction of the kingdom. However, they stopped in front of a large building. Daryl decided not to run anymore and planned to use the terrain to handle the pursuing whisperers. According to Lydia, Alpha probably wouldn't send a large group of her people. Only the strongest, Beta, would come. The whisperers often used zombies as cover, and this tall building could separate humans from the zombies. Daryl and Connie got to work setting up while Henry and Lydia kept watch outside. After about half an hour, there was movement below. A small group of zombies arrived, mixed with a few whisperers. Lydia's guess was right. Not many whisperers were mingling with the horde. Beta was leading them. Daryl stands on the balcony and raises his crossbow, piercing the head of one of the zombies below. His aim was to attract attention. Beta kept his cool, watching the fallen zombies, then raised his eyes and looked around just in time to see Daryl. 10 minutes later, Beta pushed open the door with the zombies in tow. Dozens of zombies swarmed in, and they quickly made their way to the stairway. Only it was blocked by countless things. Beta had already guessed that this was a trap surely to stop the zombies at the bottom, but Beta didn't care, as the strongest of the whisperers. So what if it's a trap? Upstairs, Daryl instructed Lydia to hide in a room. This served two purposes: to prevent her from becoming a liability and to safeguard against her. After all, they were about to kill Lydia's compatriots. In case she regretted this plan, Henry was ready, positioned at the door. Suddenly, the doorknob turned, and two whisperers entered. Since all the windows on this floor were sealed shut, it was pitch black without any light. The two intruders cautiously separated to search. Henry hid behind a cupboard and knocked he out in a couple of strokes. He had promised Lydia that he wouldn't kill unless absolutely necessary. The other whisperer heard the commotion and rushed over, raising the bow and arrow in their hands, but Connie is already behind him. Meanwhile, Daryl was hidden behind another door, ready to shoot his arrow as soon as someone opened it. Beta was prepared for this and blocked it with a door, then rushed in. Daryl's attack missed its mark, prompting him to swiftly retreat. Inside the room, Lydia hears the screams and worries about Henry. Lydia wants to go out and help, so she tries to pry the door open with a crowbar in her hand. Henry is at a disadvantage here too. The whisperer picked up a spear and stabbed him. Although Henry was able to block it, the whisperer stabbed him in the thigh. At the last moment, Dog lunged at the whisperer, knocking he to the ground. Henry also seized the opportunity to kill him with a single blow of his stick. Connie swiftly ended the fight and rushed over to check on Henry's thigh wound. Working to stop the bleeding, Daryl used his familiarity with the surroundings to silently eliminate the whisperers one by one. With the small fry out of the way, it was time to face Beta. Just then there was a rush of footsteps. Beta crashed through the boards, grabbed Daryl and slammed him against the wall. Beta's imposing size and strength were truly formidable. Daryl realized that going head-to-head wasn't an option and quickly distanced himself, grabbing a piece of wood from the floor as a makeshift weapon. This time, Daryl was at a complete disadvantage in the fight between the two. This Beta truly lives up to being the strongest member of the Whisperers. Beta relentlessly pursued Daryl, who managed to dodge an attack and stab Beta with a knife. Surprisingly, it had little effect. Beta retaliated, flinging Daryl aside. Beta continues to chase him in, but the man is nowhere to be seen. Suddenly Beta hears movement behind the curtain. Just as his attention is focused this way, behind Beta, a board slowly opens up. Daryl was originally hiding here. When Beta began to sense that something was amiss, suddenly, Beta fell down a lift shaft. Daryl, showing his disdain, spat on the ground and then turned away. But, not long after they left, logically speaking, Beta, who had fallen 3 floors down, should have died. This guy's physical resilience was astonishingly strong. As he managed to stand up once again, Beta's eyes were filled with hatred. Daryl and his group, who had left, didn't continue towards the kingdom but instead made their way to the nearest Alexandria safe zone. It does feel a little bleak. Daryl was once a key pillar here, but now, his return feels like he's a guest. I don't know when Daryl started acting like a guest when he came back to his house. This season, Michonne was so cold and unfeeling that millions of viewers began to hate the former goddess of war. Eventually, for old time's sake, the 4 Daryls were allowed into the Alexandria safe zone. Henry's wound was tended to in the infirmary. Michonne remained cautious though, deeming Lydia a potential threat. Staying here for any longer might jeopardize the safety of Alexandria's safe zone. Daryl says that once Henry's wounds are taken care of, they'll head to the kingdom. Despite Michonne's frosty demeanor, Connie approached and thanked her. Without Michonne, their integration into the Hilltop wouldn't have been possible. After a while, Henry's wound was treated. Luckily, no bones were harmed, and a few stitches sufficed. Daryl came to the lake and sat with Judith. This is a very cozy picture. How many of you remember Judith's first milk was fed by Daryl? This tough guy isn't great at expressing his emotions, but if the day came when Rick's child was in danger, Daryl might even lay down his life to save them. Although Judith is young and hasn't spent much time with Uncle Daryl, she already considers him family. Judith, smart and kind-hearted, has a hunch that Henry's gotten into some trouble, and Uncle Daryl is aiding them. Judith wants to help, but her mom is too strong to let her. Yet, Daryl tells Judith, "Your mom is right. Ensuring this place survives allows you and your brother to live carefree lives. That's what matters most." However, Judith doesn't agree. She'd heard Negan talk about everyone banding together to fight the saviors, and about her brother's bravery and kindness. So, Judith believes that, whatever the trouble, unity will prevail once again. Daryl doesn't respond, just sits there in silence. At night, the group prepares to leave. They're heading to the kingdom, and they don't want to burden Alexandria's safe zone. Daryl doesn't complain about Michonne. Daryl had been a witness to Joselyn's incident, so he understood why Michonne was so cautious. And so, the 4 of them set out once more, hoping this journey will be smoother without further obstacles. Judith watched them leave and was really angry with her mom. During the family meal, Judith was also listless and kept poking at her plate. Late into the night, Michonne tossed and turned, unable to find sleep. She knew Judith was upset with her. Unable to sleep, Michonne went to the door of her room, knocked gently and said, "Judith, I know you're angry. Can we talk about it? There's something I want to tell you." Michonne's intention was to discuss the Joselyn incident from the past. Though Judith was there at the time, she's likely forgotten about it by now. However, when Michonne opened the door, the room was empty. Michonne searched for Judith throughout the night, but couldn't find her until dawn. Finally, she went to the cell to ask Negan if he'd seen Judith. Negan claimed he hadn't seen her since yesterday. Michonne getting angry, she thought that Judith must be like this because of something Negan had said to her. Sarcastically, Negan remarked, "Now you care? I just talked about old times with her." He mentioned Rick's fortitude and Carl's bravery and kindness. Michonne didn't believe any of it.
She hates that you're not letting new people in.
No, you don't get to talk to me about Carl. And you definitely don't get to tell me what she wants or feels. She is my daughter.
That is exactly right. She is your daughter, so she has her own ideas about how things should be. Oh, you didn't come down here because you're curious. You came down here because you had no idea where she is. Maybe she's off petting a horse, or maybe she is exactly like her mother and she is not taking shit lying down.
That very statement triggered something in Michonne's mind. She hurriedly left and returned home, bursting into Judith's room. Opening the box with the revolver, Michonne found only a note. "Mom, I'm sorry, but I have to go after them. Friends need help. Your daughter, Judith. Filled with anxiety, Michonne mounted her horse and rode in the direction of the kingdom, desperately trying to catch up. Soon, she spotted Judith's small bicycle parked at the roadside, and there was a horde of zombies in front of her. Michonne was killing zombies as she walked. At this moment, Michonne is going crazy and she prays that nothing happens to Judith. It was a blessing in disguise, but Judith was fine. Michonne hugged her daughter tightly. The feeling of holding her in her arms was real. Judith was a little afraid to face Michonne after her mistake. Michonne didn't chastise her. She decided to find a place to talk about the Joselyn incident so Judith could understand why she was doing what she was doing.
And I was standing right there. And it was like you didn't know me. For a second, I thought I was too late. I thought that you changed and that I'd lost you.
The scene Michonne referred to may or may not be familiar to everyone. Back then, in order to save Judith, she had to take the lives of several children. In that moment, the look Judith gave her was filled with unfamiliarity.
You didn't look like you. Because of the blood. Then I saw it was. And I was happy you found me.
You remember that? What else?
Joselyn, her kids. They were nice to us the whole time. I remember they made it all seem like a game. So we went with them. But she was a bad person. They all were. It's why you did what you did.
This was completely unexpected for Michonne. She believed that Judith, being so young, wouldn't remember, so she never brought it up again. It was this incident that turned Michonne into the cold and ruthless person she became. From a mother's perspective, she simply couldn't bear the feeling of helplessness and losing child. Upon returning to the Alexandria safe zone, they stood before Carl's grave. Michonne recounted the events that followed the Joselyn incident. At that time, most of the people in the community had decided to be responsible only for the people in their own community, so she too became apathetic, though it wasn't the society Rick and Carl aspired to build. At the very least, it ensured the lasting stability of Alexandria's safe zone and protected the children from harm. Judith's actions today and her words had begun to change Michonne's icy demeanor. Michonne realized that she was right to keep her children safe, but she couldn't limit what they could become. They really should protect and help those who are not blood but are more family. So, mother and daughter mounted the carriage and set off toward the kingdom. The journey ahead was long, but their purpose was clear: to help their friends. At that moment, two zombies appeared in the woods outside the kingdom. A closer look reveals that they are all human disguises. Naturally, these were the Whisperer's spies, scattered throughout the area. Coincidentally, they caught sight of the carriage entering the community. There was undoubtedly some event or gathering taking place here. Inside the kingdom, several communities of survivors gathered together. Ezekiel was delivering the opening speech for the inaugural market. In his speech, he mentions Rick and Jesus as two people who deserve to be remembered by everyone in the development of civilization in this region. Without them, everyone would still be living under the rule of the saviors. Without them, the major communities wouldn't be experiencing the peace they had today. Without them, the communities would not be as peaceful as they are today. Life had to go on. The market was also set to become a bridge for further cultural development in the region. After the opening ceremony, Ezekiel suddenly noticed Carol, Luke, and a few others getting ready in the distance. Since the market had already begun, and Henry and the others hadn't returned, they were preparing to go out and search. Ezekiel exchanged a few words with the gathering before coming to bid farewell to his wife. As a father, he should have gone to Henry as well, but the market can't go unsupervised. Before the couple could exchange more words, Kelly was urging them to hurry up. He was very concerned about her sister. As they were about to leave, the gate swung open, and to their sight appeared the dog in 6 figures. Seeing them, all 4 of Luke's group broke into smiles. Carol and Ezekiel, of course, spotted their son and Michonne. Henry limped towards his mom with his own stick and an air of manliness about him.
You can't ever run away like that again. Not ever again.
Okay, I won't.
Although he had only been away for 2 weeks, Henry had obviously matured a lot. With teary eyes, Carol embraced her son. After the hug, Carol noticed another loved one, Daryl. The two of them had the best chance to be a couple, but it was a miss. But their kinship is still there.
Michonne.
I was in the neighborhood, so...
Do you remember us?
Judith. You're Carol and you're the king. I've been drawing pictures of you since I was little. Your hair got really long.
It did.
Tara then approached, but her smile froze as she laid eyes on Lydia. She questioned Daryl, asking if the plan wasn't just to bring back Henry. Why was Lydia here too? A silence fell over the scene. Only Michonne spoke with seriousness. Let's gather the leaders here. We have something important to discuss. In a short while, the leaders from the 4 communities convened in the meeting room. Before getting down to business, Michonne apologized and said, I know I'd had some disagreements with some of you in this room, but I care about each one of you. During that time, my focus was solely on protecting my family, doing what was right for my people, but I've come to my senses. The future of the Alexandria safe zone is not about remaining stagnant, but about moving forward together with everyone. I'm sorry for not recognizing this earlier, but I'm here now. Carol and Ezekiel nodded their heads. They were all family and had no axe to grind. Following this, Gabriel stepped forward to speak, saying, Our Alexandria Safe Zone Committee has voted internally and decided to offer Lydia asylum. She's now one of us. We hope you can join us in this decision. Tara raised a concern. If Alpha seeks retaliation, she'd likely target the Hilltop, not Alexandria's safe zone. I need to do what's right for my people.
And look, when she came to my gates, I asked her to run away. And when she didn't, I was angry.
Then you know I'm not okay with this.
I do. I also know why Rick didn't trust me when I showed up at the gates of the prison. And how people didn't trust you after seeing you on the other side of the governor's firing line.
I was gonna kill you on sight when you washed up on our shore.
To this, Tara found herself momentarily speechless. In the end, the 4 major communities collectively decided to shelter Lydia. Simultaneously, each community would send personnel to the Hilltop to guard against any retaliation from the Whisperers, and they're planning to leave today. From this point on, the 4 major communities once again formed a united front. Ezekiel even brought out a charter, which had previously been drawn up by Rick. It was akin to a joint community contract, though it was signed 5 years later than intended. Just as they were signing the charter, within the Hilltop, for individuals prepared to set out, they also wanted to join the festivities at the market. A married couple drove the carriage. It was their wedding anniversary, and they wished to find something special. They were about to reach the kingdom when they were attacked. The carriage overturned, and the 4 individuals were brutally murdered by the Whisperers. Alpha took a liking to the woman's beautiful golden hair and proceeded to cut off her scalp. Within the kingdom, the 4 major communities signed the charter. Lydia and Henry felt a weight lifted and began exploring the market. Undoubtedly, it was a grand event. Some people put up their own stuff in exchange. Some sought out blacksmiths to forge weapons. Luke and Alden took the stage, showcasing their talents. Eugene demonstrated the wonders of science to children. It's a sight that would be hard to believe in a post-apocalyptic world. Of course, some couldn't participate in the upcoming market. These were the individuals selected in the meeting, preparing to head to the Hilltop to prevent the Whisperers' attack. As they ventured a bit further, they came across an overturned carriage ahead. From the items scattered around, it appeared to be from the Hilltop. Bloodstains marked the ground, but no bodies were visible. It was highly likely that the Whisperers had struck. Daryl examined the traces on the ground. It seemed the individuals were dragged away from this direction. The current dilemma was whether the abducted individuals were still alive. Pursuing them might yield a chance for rescue, but it was also possible that the sadistic foes were seeking revenge against the Hilltop. In the end, Michonne came up with a compromise. The 4 of them would track, while the rest continued on the road. Within the kingdom's market, a blonde beauty in a green dress appeared. Curiously, she took in her surroundings. This woman was none other than Alpha, who had infiltrated the market. Her attire, including the golden hair, was all from the woman she had killed. As Alpha examined the scene before her, the Earl couple walked past her with their child. After they left, Alpha continued to hang out. Ahead, The sight of 4 banners on the wall captured her attention. This made Alpha realize that the region was home to 4 communities. As she scrutinized the scene, Ezekiel approached her and greeted her. Ezekiel found her somewhat unfamiliar, having never seen her before. Thankfully, Alpha improvised, claiming she had recently joined Alexandria's safe zone, so not recognizing her was normal. Ezekiel didn't suspect anything and warmly introduced her to the market. That night, the kingdom's grand event began. They had managed to acquire a movie projection setup. People from all 4 neighborhoods were waiting in their seats, especially the children, who had never seen such a novelty since they were born. Watching a movie in the apocalypse was something people hadn't dared to dream of. It became a unique feature of the kingdom. Lydia also sat in her seat and waited for Henry. 10 minutes passed, and still, Henry hadn't appeared. Lydia didn't think much of it. Lydia didn't believe anything would happen to Henry within the kingdom, but at that moment, a figure sat next to Lydia. Lydia was so engrossed in what she was watching that she didn't notice, until the figure put a hand on her hand. Lydia turned round and breathed heavily, but she could only pretend to be calm. Later, the mother and daughter stepped outside. Alpha was furious, seeing her daughter immersed in this false happiness. Alpha felt Lydia had betrayed the Whisperer's beliefs. Thus, Alpha demanded that Lydia come back with her immediately. Lydia, with a resolute expression, told her mother that the people here were kind. They care about each other, and they're even willing to fight you to protect me. Leave now. Stay away from my life. I don't want them to kill you either. Despite her evil, Alpha did indeed love her daughter, though her mindset had twisted in the apocalypse, altering the way she expressed it. Knowing that his daughter had made up her mind, Alpha turned around and left the kingdom, heartbroken. In the forest, Daryl and the others continued their search and tracking efforts. Following the trail of blood on the ground, they had ventured quite a distance. However, the blood trail suddenly diverged into 3 directions here, which made no sense at all. Daryl realizes something is wrong and decides to go back in case it's a trap. Just as they were turning around, 2 zombies emerged from the nearby woods. These were clearly the 2 individuals who had gone missing from the hilltop. Yumiko and Daryl quickly took care of them with arrows. After dealing with the zombies, they heard movement in the nearby woods again. Michonne cautioned everyone to be vigilant and watch their hands closely, just in case there were whisperers among them. After killing a few zombies, even more started approaching them. It was evident that they were in a trap. Daryl urged them to quickly return to the main road, but when they turned around, there was a large group of zombies coming the same way they came. This was getting eerie. Zombies blocked every direction. They had no choice but to draw their weapons and eliminate them all. 10 minutes later, the ground was littered with zombie corpses. But then, Yumiko froze. A whisperer emerged, wearing the skin of a member from the hilltop. It was downright chilling. It's not over. More and more whisperers appeared from all around and surrounded them once again, all of them with knives in their hands. Faced with the numerous whisperers, fighting back seemed like a dead end. Daryl had no option but to drop his weapon, and so, the 4 of them became captives. Alpha gradually approached them. However, to everyone's surprise, Alpha spoke. "You think it's because of my daughter? This is our new camp. 4 fools stumbled into us during the day. We had to kill them." And Michonne, not to be outdone, said, "Our 4 communities have sheltered Lydia. If you want to forcefully take her back, be prepared for our joint retaliation." Alpha, instead of being afraid, pulled out his pistol and said,
Your group is in no position to threaten me. That is a habit that needs to be broken. Come with me. Just you.
Daryl followed Alpha without fear. He wanted to see what this woman was up to. Soon, dawn began to break. The 2 of them arrived at a deep pit, where something seemed to be present. As Daryl continued to walk, he suddenly froze. The pit was filled with countless zombies, an overwhelming and horrifying sight. It was truly terrifying. Daryl couldn't help but inwardly marvel. Was this the source of the Whisperer's confidence?
The only reason you and your friends are alive is because I let you live.
What do you want?
Nothing.
Alpha answered his question. "You don't have what I want. I've observed your way of life and walked your streets. It's a joke. Really, our whisperers follow the laws of nature, and we will survive." Daryl couldn't help but scorn her words, thinking that these were just nonsense theories she used to manipulate her followers. Alpha continued, "They follow me because I am Alpha. As a leader, it is vital to maintain prestige. That's why I've done those things." Alpha's tone had a hint of compassion in her voice as she spoke. Daryl had a sinking feeling. Could it be that this woman had already attacked their communities? Without disclosing her actions, Alpha turned to Daryl, issuing a veiled threat. Your friends at the camp are safe, but tell them that if they trespass on my territory again, don't blame me for leading a horde of zombies to pay them a visit. Listen carefully, the fractured interstate divides it. To the south is my territory, and I've marked the northern boundary for you. You'll see it when you leave. Now you can go. Your friends are waiting for you up north. Now that he could leave, Daryl didn't dawdle any longer, and soon he saw Carol at the top of the hill. Alpha hadn't harmed them, but was this woman truly as benevolent as she seemed? After their departure, Alpha stood somberly in the woods. She understood that after this incident, she and her daughter would only grow farther apart. Beta wanted to console Alpha, but his attempt was rebuffed. Alpha wanted to be alone. Coincidentally, an unlucky whisperer witnessed this moment. With no one watching, a tear escaped her eye. Alpha noticed and looked back. Then Alpha hooked her finger. Alpha didn't want anyone to witness her vulnerability. Only a cold-hearted Alpha could lead the whisperers. Daryl and the four of them returned the way they came, but then on the road they see Siddiq tied to a tree. What was going on? Wasn't he at the marketplace? Siddiq was obviously injured and couldn't speak for a while, just pointing weakly to the distance. As they followed his gaze, their hearts sank. A row of severed heads was lined up neatly on the hilltop. Although it is hard to see who they are, they must be members of the four communities. They walked towards the top of the mountain little by little. So this is what Alpha meant when she said she had to do something. This is also the demarcation line she was talking about. As they got closer, the faces of the heads became clearer and clearer. Even Michonne, who had been through so much, found it hard to accept. The first two heads belonged to the leader and a member of the highwaymen. The third was DJ from Alexandria's safe zone. In fact, people had gone missing since Alpha's appearance at the marketplace yesterday. This girl, for example, couldn't find her friends when she tried. Earl's wife is also missing. The friend that this teenager from the hilltop was desperately looking for has now appeared on a stick. And Alden, who was performing on stage, also noticed that his girlfriend Enid was missing. As they reached the next head, both Michonne and Siddiq broke down. Daryl turned his gaze to the last head.
No! I can't find Henry.
Just look at me.
It was Henry's. Oh God, it was suffocating. Seeing friends and loved ones murdered, their heads displayed before them, it was an overwhelming and heart-wrenching sight. The place where the stick had been stuck became the dividing line for the Whisperers and a place of sadness for all of them. Back at the kingdom, Siddiq stood on a platform, recounting the events. He had been one of the captives. The Whisperers deliberately kept him alive so that he could tell the crowd what happened and spread the fear. After their silent abduction, the two members of the highwaymen, along with DJ, tried to rescue them. Others joined the resistance. Nobody was clinging to life. Instead, they united to protect each other. But just when everyone thought they'd escaped, Alpha came with more men, and then the tragedy unfolded. This time, no one suggested revenge, because sometimes one has to endure. In the previous episode, it was mentioned that the Whisperers killed people from the four major communities and put their heads on display along the border. Crossing this line would provoke a war, so seeking revenge was off the table as it would only lead to more deaths. 3 months later, winter arrived, and this year seemed colder than ever. The kingdom felt desolate. Despite hopes that the marketplace would alter the situation, the lack of manpower remained a pressing issue. Heating facilities were severely decayed, worsened by an accidental fire. The kingdom was no longer habitable, so they had to move. Otherwise, they would not be able to survive the winter. Folks from other communities came to aid in the safe passage to the hilltop. As they walked out the gates, the people were overcome with sadness. This was their home. After all, Ezekiel was particularly distressed. Having poured his heart into building this community, he now had to depart. Unlikely to return, the convoy moved slowly along the road. Michonne inquired about the hilltop situation. Yumiko said that despite the 3 months that had passed, people were still grieving. They are still without a leader. They have written to Maggie. All eyes turned towards the distance at that moment. A few zombies roamed the field, unmistakably being monitored by the Whisperers. This upset Alden so much that he started to say something sarcastic, something along the lines of, Haven't the bloody whispers done enough to them? He directed his comments while keeping an eye on Lydia. It's a good thing Daryl spoke up in time for Alden to say anything. During this time, the way people looked at Lydia was notably strange, considering the number of lives lost for her. Some even spoke ill of her. It's a good thing Daryl's been around to defend Lydia. Even Carol was no exception. Every time she saw Lydia, thoughts of her son Henry came rushing in.
Henry wanted her here. No one else did. She's a good kid.
Every time I look at her, all I see is him.
What do you see when you look at me?
I see you.
Ezekiel, who was ahead, overheard the conversation between the two and looked back, witnessing the scene. He didn't say anything, instead engaging Jerry in a weather-related discussion. It seems likely that heavy snow is on the way. It didn't take long for snow to fall. In just half an hour, they blanketed the landscape in a pristine white. At the roadside, 2 zombies appeared, drawn by the noise. Shuffling toward them, Daryl and Carol each took aim and dispatched them with arrows. Carol was about to go over to retrieve her arrow, but Ezekiel told her to go on ahead, that he could take care of it. Lydia saw that their attention was drawn away from the zombies and no one was paying attention to her, so she disappeared under the cover of the carriage. In fact, Ezekiel was deliberately trying to distract Carol. He confided in Daryl, "I don't want to be the bad guy, but I'm going to say it. It's been a rough time for Carol and I. We'll start over when we get to the hilltop. Yet, I hope it's just the 2 of us." Implicitly, he hoped Lydia wouldn't stay there, to avoid causing further heartache. There was another layer to his meaning. He wanted Daryl to leave as well. He doesn't want his wife to give her attention to someone else. Daryl gave Ezekiel a disdainful glance, then turned and rejoined the larger group. Lydia, on the other hand, heads off into the woods alone when no one's looking. She didn't know where she was going. She just wanted to separate from the group. It wasn't until she stumbled upon a small frozen pond, with a zombie trapped in the ice. Lydia slowly moved forward, the ice supporting her weight. As she faced the zombie, which could only move its mouth, she crouched down, seemingly making a decision. For the past 3 months, others' gazes had been accusatory, and Lydia had been mired in self-blame and guilt. Mom killed so many good people, including Henry, who she loved, and it made it impossible for her to face them. She thought maybe ending it all was better, so she extended her hand toward the zombie's mouth, eyes closed, ready to put an end to it all. Right as the zombie was about to bite, Lydia heard footsteps behind her, and when she looks back, it's Carol. The 2 of them looked at each other without saying a word. Seeing Lydia in this state, Carol comprehended that the young girl was also grappling with deep self-blame. A few minutes later, Carol returned to the road with Lydia. The others were discussing their next moves. Due to the intensifying snow, even pushing through the night wouldn't get them to the hilltop. It seemed better to find a place to rest for now. A few of the older members thought of a place to rest at the same time, which was the former Salvation Hall. New member Magna couldn't believe that people had actually lived in this place before, because at this moment, the Salvation Hall is in a state of disrepair and dilapidation. In the Alexandria security zone, a group of people gathered in a house. This was one of the few places in the community, along with Aaron's house, with a closet. They had to come here to get warm. Gabriel brought Negan along, saving him from freezing in his cell. Negan started talking a lot more since he had so many people with him, but Judith was the first one to stop Negan when he talked dirty. All Negan could do was keep apologizing. He had a soft spot for the little guy. Judith sat by the window, watching. She was there because Uncle Daryl had asked her to look after the dog. However, the dog had disappeared with the onset of the heavy snow. Negan felt something amiss. He caught a scent in the air, while others thought he was just stirring up conversation and scolded him to quiet down. Eugene's brow furrowed.
Get away from there. Blizzard's done some tearing and blaring, and our chimney's ventilation capabilities are nil to none. It'd be unwise to spark another blaze lest we plan on ceasing all respiratory functions, aka smoking and choking.
God, I missed you, Eugene.
Can't say the same.
Without a place to build a fire, it's going to be hard to get by on this bedding alone. Young people are fine, but there are old people and children here, so Gabriel decided to move the group to Aaron's house before it got colder. It's a little smaller, but at least there's a closet.
Seriously?
Not one of you assholes is gonna untie me?
We could tell Michonne it was an accident.
It's just a joke. Of course, with the storm outside, Eugene brought a rope, ensuring everyone held on tight to avoid leaving anyone behind. Prepared, Eugene opened the door. The wind was bitterly cold, and Eugene could barely see the road ahead as he led the way with his torch. The good thing is that this is, after all, where they've lived for many years, so they should be able to get there safely with experience. In the distance, a dog's bark echoed. Judith left the group and ran toward the sound, quickly disappearing into the snowstorm. Negan, without a second thought, disregarded his own comfort and followed suit, but the blizzard was too heavy, and the visibility was only 2 to 3 meters. Negan shouted for Judith repeatedly, receiving no response, while he prayed fervently for her safety. Suddenly, a wooden plank struck Negan's leg, likely drawing blood. Nonetheless, he struggled to his feet, continuing to call out for Judith. Judith still hadn't responded, but the sound of a dog barking echoed in the distance. Negan could only limp over to check. Fortunately, Judith was there. In the process of putting a leash on the dog, Negan scooped up Judith and began making his way back. The snow was even heavier now, erasing the footprints they had left earlier. They had to rely on their instincts to find their way. After a while, Negan's strength waned, and the wound on his leg throbbed, forcing him to stop and rest for a bit. On Michonne's end, they began to sense the intensifying snowstorm. If they follow the planned route, the roads will probably be blocked. Carol suggested that since even the river was frozen, they could cross through the woods instead. Others acknowledged the proximity of this alternative, but it would mean traversing Alpha's designated territory head-on. Carol, because of her son's death, doesn't recognize any dividing line at all. Michonne agreed with this approach. Sneaking through during the night, they believed they might go unnoticed. It was better than dying on the road. Night fell, and the party set out, and it was not long before they reached this sad place. A few months ago, the heads of their loved ones and friends hung from the branches here. Passing through, each of them was weighed down by heavy hearts. Entering the Whisperer's territory, everyone was cautious. Soon, figures emerged ahead. This winter was bitterly cold, freezing even the zombies into ice sculptures. Michonne stepped forward and slashed twice. The zombie's head was crushed in an instant. Given the cold weather, the Whisperers were unlikely to appear. Daryl signaled for the rest to hurry through the Whisperer's territory. The rest of the journey didn't present much danger. 10 minutes later, they reached the riverbank smoothly. Daryl prepared to test the thickness of the ice to see if it could bear their weight. Michonne was right behind him, pulling Daryl by the hand so she could pull him back if the ice broke. Daryl gave the ice a forceful stomp. It was thick enough, and as long as they kept a distance, it should hold. While everyone's attention was on the frozen surface, Lydia slipped away once more, unnoticed. Daryl confirmed the ice's safety and looked at the group. Just as they were preparing to cross the river, zombies suddenly emerged from the snowy ground. Several warriors took care of them while Ezekiel organized the others to quickly cross the river. He also reassured them not to panic or crowd, or they would only make the ice on the river unbearable. The zombies in the snow are quickly disposed of. Luckily, there aren't too many of them. However, the commotion attracted nearby zombies. 5 minutes later, everyone had reached the other side, except for Carol, who went to find Lydia. Daryl covered the rear. At this moment, a zombie emerged from the snow and approached Daryl. Daryl was about to approach and kill it when another zombie grabbed his leg from the snow. Refusing to let go, he had to use his crossbow to break free, but was pounced upon by another approaching zombie. With no weapon in hand, Daryl was helpless against the zombie. Daryl then notices the ice pick above his head. He tries to reach it, but he's always a bit short. Carol, who pursued Lydia, eventually found her in a small house. Lydia thinks there's no hope in life now. She questioned what crossing the river would truly change. Lydia confides in Carol, saying that Henry says she's a good person, but she's not. As long as she remained part of their group, there would never be peace for them. You know I'm right. The only way to solve their problems is to kill her. Her mother had killed Henry, and Carol should take revenge, especially since they were in a place where no one would ever find out. With that, Lydia picked up Carol's spear and aimed it at her own neck. In that moment, Carol truly accepted Lydia. Perhaps if her own daughter hadn't died, she would be around Lydia's age. The next evening, the group, after enduring hardships, finally reached the Hilltop. From then on, the residents of the kingdom joined forces with the Hilltop to strive for a better future. That night, everyone had to temporarily rest in the mansion. Accommodation arrangements would be sorted out later. Carol stood by the window, a sad expression on her face. She might have been missing Henry or contemplating the path ahead. Carol didn't look at Ezekiel. She quietly mentioned,
I'm going to Alexandria tomorrow with you.
But I will never stop loving you.
And I'll never regret the fairy tale.
That's where the real home is. After all these years, since Henry's death, Carol sensed a lingering resentment from Ezekiel. Though he restrained himself from exploding, this explained his words to Daryl during the day. Carol then removed her ring and offered it back to Ezekiel, but he refused. With this, the two officially parted ways peacefully. The next day, Michonne returned to the Alexandria safe zone with a few companions. Judith rushed up and embraced her mother. Michonne, seeing the frostbite on her daughter's face, Michonne anxiously inquired about what had happened. Lydia, curious, also took in her new home. Carol also surveyed the drastically changed Alexandria safe zone, finding it hard to believe it was the same community as before. After embracing Judith, Michonne looked ahead and spotted a young boy playing hide and seek with her. Many viewers are wondering where the baby in Michonne's tummy has gone. Now we're going to formally introduce him. There were only a few shots before because there weren't many. Michonne's son was named RJ. He was the only person left in this world, besides the deceased Carl, who shared a blood relation with Rick. Michonne returns home and hears about Negan's rescue of Judith the night before. Despite the danger, she was surprised that Negan would do that. Negan said, "The last time I was lying here was when Rick slit my throat. It's a funny thing. I told you I've changed a lot. Judith is also a special girl who lights my hopes like a fire." This incident altered Michonne's cold attitude toward Negan. Perhaps Negan truly wasn't the same person he once was. Winter gradually passed. Negan's words seemed to make sense. The people you see as evil, they don't see themselves as evil. Everyone is fighting for survival, striving to stay alive. Spring arrived, and the Whisperers resumed their activities. They seemed to have gone elsewhere during the winter. Alpha knew her sole vulnerability was her daughter. Therefore, periodically, she had Beta correct her, all to toughen herself and steal her heart.